Good morning, SEPA! It is good that we are gathered here in person. I continue to say that every time we gather in person makes the COVID pandemic seem so far away. So it is good that we are gathered here this morning. If I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, my name is Bishop Brian Penman, and it is a distinct honor to serve as the Bishop of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod. We are Lutherans together, loving God and loving neighbor. So this morning we are gathered here to talk specifically about building use and thinking about how our incarnational ministry lives itself out in communities. So we have a panel of folks here with us today. So Mr. Robert Peters is with us, who will be speaking. Wes Willison and Marcus Tarkanina, there we go. Yeah. So we are thankful that you all three are with us today and will be facilitating our conversation here this morning. But I continue to be one who is deeply thankful of your time. So the fact that you took time out of a Saturday morning here to be with us to think about how we do mission and ministry together, I'm just so thankful that you are engaging this work of ministry. So let us open with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for the ability to gather this morning, or whether we're watching this later on its recording. We just give you thanks that we can be together, and we can be reminded that this thing that we call ministry and life is not something we do in isolation, but something that we do together. So Lord, as we spend the morning and afternoons talking about how you call us to steward our resources, may we be mindful that through our buildings and our property, you are present in this community. And so help us dream and imagine ways that you are calling us forward and to helping our neighbors, to equip our communities to be places of transformation where your love and grace changes lives. So Lord, help us hear the call to that work. Help us understand that that is the mission that is before us all in these changing and shifting times, that the mission of being your healing agents is needed more now than ever. And so we ask that you might strengthen us for this work through Christ's holy name. Amen.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. If you would give me one moment as I get organized. Very good. All right. So my name is Wes Willison. I'm going to walk us through this first 30, 40, maybe an hour chunk. We'll see how much we get through. We have a lot of material for you today. So we're going to start. I'm going to ask you some questions and try to help you get oriented, reflect on what you're bringing into this room. And then from there, I'll present a little bit, and then we'll wrap up with some questions before we move on. My first question for you: if you brought some material to write notes, to take down, if you could focus on that for a moment, just look to yourself, listen. If you need to sit in prayer, sit in silence as you write on this. I'm going to give you some time to reflect. Why are you here? How would you describe the factors that have brought you into this room today? Let's take some time to think about this, right? So the first thing I say what are the push factors that are making you be here, right? This is Saturday morning. I don't always love going to work on Saturday morning. How would you describe the things that this is what's pushed me here? What are the pull factors? What are you actually excited about? What's a reason that you've wanted to show up this morning? And then how does all this make you feel, right? How would you say is the state of your heart? How are you feeling as you walk into this room today to deal with what we're dealing? Go ahead and take a few minutes. Next, let's think about what you want from today. when you leave, when this event is over, what do you want to be bringing back to your space, to your home, to your congregation with you? We are going to set the agenda, right? We're bringing a lot of things for you. That may not be actually what you want, though. So take note of that now before we start biasing your perspective, giving you things to think about. List some of those things out. Hopefully we'll answer those questions, right? But if we're nearing the end of this event, if we're getting to the question and answer session at the end of today and we haven't answered something that's really important to you, take note of that. Ask us. Make sure we can deal with that. We can help you address that before we leave. I know we're at a building summit, so let's talk about our buildings. Let's talk about our experience in our spaces. The question is, where is the pain? Where do you notice there being pain or stress in your experience of this building? This can be a literal question, right? Sometimes literally when we walk through buildings with inspectors, with engineers, we can see, oh, there's a leak. Oh, that bathroom not functioning the way it should. That joint, all of those things. Maybe you notice physical things. Maybe you're also paying attention to other social, other personal experiences. Some of these rooms, these are just not useful in the way that they used to be or they've ever been. What they were designed for is not what they're doing anymore. Take note of those things, those specific places. Maybe think about budget. How does your budget feel? Sounds like there's some unfortunate pain with our budgets. Let's take note of that. Another way to think about this is actually HVAC, right? Where in your building you always keep heated and cooled because there's always activity. There's just always things happening there. And then what places you're like, you know what, we just can't afford to do that anymore. That place, that part of the building, it's just too expensive. We don't see the value. Maybe that illuminates some things about how your church functions. Also, think about who in your congregation is bearing the pain of your building right now. Let's think about the custodians, folks who work to maintain the space. If you have a sexton, maybe it's you or someone else who's unsung, right? Maybe they're not being tended to or cared for the way they need to be or paid enough. And of course, the big question, why do you think this is all occurring? If you have ideas, if you have diagnoses, that's really where we're going. That's where I want to take us in this first session, is thinking about, okay, these are the pains that we've recognized. Where do we think these are coming from and diagnosing that? But on the other side, let's think about centers of gravity, right? So if pain is one pole, then these centers of gravity are the other. Where would you say are the places with heat, with energy, where this building is working for us? This is good. This feels like home. This is where we're seeing belonging. We're seeing the things that we want from our building. Where do you recognize those places in your space? Are there specific rooms, specific entryways where when people come through, this tends to be happy, tends to be engaging, we tend to see the good things that our church is about? Where are those places? Which parts of your building were you to leave, were you to transition, make some choice about the space, you would be disappointed to lose? That space, that was a great room. That was a great place. Really valued that. Another way to think about this is, where do good things just routinely occur? Regardless of whether you're there, or who's present, or who's leading, it's just good things tend to happen here. Think about that place. One last question on this. If your building's walls could talk, which rooms would have the stories? Where do you think you'd hear some things? These are a few questions we've looked at. Why are you here? What do you want from today? Where is the pain? And these centers of gravity, where are the good things happening? Keep those in mind. Keep writing on those. Keep reflecting on those. I really hope that we can be helpful to you. I'm Wes. This is Ken. That's Robert. We're going to be presenting. We're going to be organizing this conversation, but This is about what you need. So take those notes before I really start going into other things. Just to begin, who is Wes? Why am I here? Why should you listen to me? Why should you take me seriously? I'm going to walk through some pieces of my background, so hopefully you can understand some of my church experience, some of my pastoral background. I'll start by just talking about this building. This is the East Grand Boulevard United Methodist Church in Detroit, Michigan. I don't know if anyone has any roots in Detroit. My family immigrated through the upper parts of this country, landed in Ontario and Detroit. And this building was in part built by my great-grandfather. He came from Denmark. He was an engineer. He was an architect. He was instrumental in the early part of the 20th century of building this building. In fact, East Grand Boulevard is one of the main thoroughfares. It's like Baltimore Pike of Detroit. That's a pretty great library. This is a spectacular building. It's unfortunately abandoned and totally derelict now. But when it was in the 1910s, 1920s, it was growing, hit about 1,000 members. They had space for 750 inside. And Grand Boulevard was widened in 1930. And this building was so important that my great-grandfather was hired to move the parish house. He lifted it off the foundation and moved it to another side of the building so that they could retain worshiping in this space. So eminent domain wouldn't apply. It was thriving. My name is Wes. Maybe you can guess. My full name is Wesley. My full name is John Wesley. This is where I come from. So that was my great-grandfather. This is the other side of my family. This is my grandma and grandfather, my Gungung and Nainai on my mother's side. They immigrated from Angel Island. They came through the other of the islands, not Ellis, but Angel. And they came as doctors. They were fleeing the communist government in mainland China. They went to med school in Taiwan, and this was a Baptist church that helped them meet, helped them fall in love, get married, make a family before transitioning into this country. They came before the Chinese Exclusion Act was lifted. So in 1958 or so, they entered this country. My mother was born here. She's as New York as it gets. She was raised in New Rochelle. But this is one of the few pictures I have of my grandfather in church. He actually never returned. My grandmother was a routine. She brought us to church. She raised us in the church, in Chinese church specifically. But my grandfather, he stayed away. So this is a fascinating picture for me because I would love to know more stories. He was cagey about it, but this is part of the other side of my family. This here is a picture of the Evanston Vineyard. I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. My parents are Northwestern graduates. They met through the Vineyard, through InterVarsity. The Vineyard is sort of at the Pentecostal charismatic boundary of the Evangelical movement coming out of the Jesus People movement in California. So we're talking acoustic guitars, folk music on the beach, baptisms, ecstatic expressions of prayer, welcoming of the Holy Spirit. This is the church I grew up in. And it looks very informal because it is. We're talking Hawaiian shirts and people coming from riding their Harleys into church and bagels afterwards. This is the group that I grew up with. This is before my time. This is in the 80s. This church grew. It eventually hit about 1,000 members. And in my time, we met in the auditorium of a high school in Evanston. And eventually, they bought a building. But it was after my time there. This is a picture of my father with me working in the office. He was the worship pastor there. So he played guitar, he led the gospel choir, he did music outreach with the neighborhood, with Chicago. We did a lot in Champaign-Urbana and the South Side, all kinds of music in my house all growing up. And this is a picture I found while doing research for this talk. I was like, Dad, what's this? You never talked to me about this. He's like, oh yeah, I brought you in all the time so your mom could focus on her work. And the office was really accommodating. This was like home for you. You felt really comfortable. You'd go right to sleep in the office. In 2004, my family moved overseas. We were part of churches in Kenya and Uganda. I did high school in East Africa. So that's me on the right learning to play guitar. Guitar was great in high school. Everyone wants to be in the rock band. And on the left side, that church, that's in Nairobi. It was that dark in there. They didn't have windows in the church space. It was really hard to see anything. But my dad was working in the vineyard churches there. My mother was a teacher. We lived overseas and experienced the international church. We spent years in Kampala. This is in Uganda. This was the church space where we met. It was an international church, which means it was non-denominational. There were plenty of people from all over the world, all of their backgrounds, and we would meet here and try to figure out what it was like, what it meant to do church together in a place where all of us kind of didn't really feel at home, right? In Uganda, that's where if I went to church in the local church, people would touch my hair and try to figure out what's going on. Why does my hair feel so weird? And it was nice to go to church where that wasn't the case, where we all just kind of were different in our own ways and found a way to be together. But you can see the walls actually were not fully finished. It was an open air space. That's corrugated steel roof. When it would rain, it would get so loud, we would all just have to stand in the middle of the room, shoulder to shoulder, like a pack of penguins or something, just to be able to hear because it would get so loud. But there was a time meeting in this location was so difficult because traffic in Uganda had gotten so difficult. It would take you multiple hours just to get from one neighborhood to the next. We eventually started doing at least once a month zone church meetings in your neighborhood where you would just find someone who had a backyard who would be willing to host, and you'd just go there. And you'd have breakfast together, and you'd worship, and the kids would be in. You'd just do everything together, a church in the backyard, because you just couldn't make it. It was just too difficult. The building wasn't working for us. This was post-Civil War. This was in Uganda. There was a lot of expats who were working in the aid industry, who were working for the government, who were on mission. This was a really interesting time to be a part of the church. What I'll say, basically, my point is, I'm a bit of a denominational mutt. I've experienced a lot of parts of the church, and there's no better example than this. We would pray Korean style in the morning, and then we'd do German hymns, and then we'd do American Evangelical Chris Tomlin songs, and it was all in one swirl. This church here this was a Catholic church that my church in college had tried to do a multi-site experiment in. I was part of the Blue Root Vineyard in Media. I went to Swarthmore College starting in 2008, so in Delco, some of you are from. And my experience in the college was great, but I wanted a church experience as well. And Blue Root Vineyard there was a lot of young folks. It was a thriving, exciting place. And raise your hand, were any of you part of the multi-site thing that was going on? This is more in evangelicalism. I don't think this affected you. It was exhausting, and I'm glad you never experienced it. But we were trying to do church in this old Catholic building. It did not fit. It was frustrating. The pews didn't work for how we wanted to move and engage with each other. The space didn't really fit we played a lot of music, and the kind of music we played didn't sound very good there. We actually ended up just meeting in the back room, sort of the rec hall, because they heated that space even when the heater was broke, and we would be able to do music there much more comfortably. So that was college. This is, most recently, I was part of Circle of Hope. This is a Mennonite and a Baptist expression of the church in Philadelphia. There were multiple sites again. I lived in Kensington, in the northeast part of the city, while I went to Princeton Seminary for my Master's of Divinity. I was a student there from 2016 to 2019, and I lived in Philadelphia and commuted up. But there you can see me teaching during Lent. And then on the right, that's the pandemic. So that's Easter morning of 2020. We couldn't gather. Again, this is a common story, right? Just can't gather in the right way we want to. So everyone in the church, we rode our bikes to the nearest park and met for coffee and sunrise worship just in the park. One of my favorite church experiences of all time, to be able to gather with people in the middle of the pandemic. It was really special. This is the farminary. This was an expression of the seminary. I don't know if any of you have heard of this. It's a farm at Princeton Seminary, and it's a classroom space. So when I started at the seminary, I was expecting to work in the vineyard. That was my expectation. I was hoping to go in and work for the vineyard. While I was a student there, the conversation around sexuality really turned to the right, and I was like, I don't think there's a place for me. I don't think this is the ministry that I'm going to be able to be a part of. And so as I was reconsidering, what is it that I'm in seminary for? What am I looking for? This place was really valuable to me. I am not a farmer. I have no interest in being a farmer. But as I was taking summer Greek, the director of the farm, you can see him with the cap over there, he came in and talked about what the farminary was trying to do was very similar to Greek and Hebrew classes, actually. The Bible is written in Greek and Hebrew, right? So we learn these languages to get closer to the text, to get closer to what our ancestors and our tradition really understood the faith to be. He was saying the Bible was written by agrarian folks, right? This book was written by farmers, for farmers. Jesus is a carpenter, but he's using agrarian metaphors. He's talking to a farming audience because that's how they could understand what the kingdom of God was going to be like. We don't live next to the land like that. We are not farmers. So let's learn Greek and Hebrew, but what if we learned it while learning what it means to live in the rhythms of the land and in farming? When was the last time your family was farmers? When was the last time your church was connected to the land at the rhythm of farmers? Some of us, it's very close. Some of it's very far back. Some of it's really joyful memories. Some of it's very painful. And this was a space to address that. Questions around race, questions around slavery, and the legacy of that, and what that has done for our churches, and really how it's harmed our churches. This is a really powerful space. This picture specifically is the compost pile. Every time you start a class at the Farminary, you go to the compost pile. It's not pleasant. If you've ever worked with compost, it stinks. I remember one of my classmates was pregnant, first trimester, and she was really struggling. She got a pass. She was able to step back. But it's a magnetic space because compost is alive, right? This is the place of death. This is where you throw everything that's waste. There's nothing else we can do with this. And yet that's where everything turns over. So you're Lutherans. You get this theology of the cross that comes through the compost pile, I hope. This was September afternoon in 2016, so almost 10 years ago. The Farminary actually just celebrated its 10-year anniversary. This was the second year. They're celebrating their 10th year this year. On Thursday, I was there to help chair a faculty panel of all these professors who came back to talk about what their experience of teaching and learning here was. It's still going. It's great. I'm very happy the Farminary is still doing well. But what I'm saying is all of these heterodox experiences, these mixed backgrounds, these are reflected in me, right? I am racially mixed. I am denominationally mixed. I'm coming to you from a lot of different perspectives. And Robert and Ken, I'll let them bring their experience as well. And I'm sure you're bringing some mixed experiences as well. But in an urban environment, right? In these spaces, some of us less urban than others, but these are assets, right? It's easy when we're inside our buildings to think of these things as like isolated, solo. We must figure out what to do in our space. No, we're integrated. We're part of our neighborhoods, and that's the part we're going to be exploring today. Like, what does it look like to integrate, to be a part of our neighborhoods, of our ecologies more fully? So here's one more picture of this is me composting. We would actually get these deliveries from, do any of you do HelloFresh or Factor, any of these meals? They would drop off their extra food. It was wrapped in tiny little plastic bags. We'd have to open every plastic bag, pull every slice of ginger or garlic out, and then throw it in the compost pile, and then throw away the plastic bag. We're like, what are we doing? What is this? We're giving them a write-off and giving them free. It's insane. But part of the tragedy of the Farminary, this land was bought by the seminary in their incredible endowment, large S, in 2008. During the financial crisis, they were looking somewhere to park some cash. They bought this asset and forgot about it. That's how Princeton operates. It's kind of an insane system that this vital piece of land that had been rented to farmers for years was sort of just forgotten about. My professor, the guy who directs the farm, in 2014, he was finishing his PhD and started proposing this idea. He said, well, we have a farm. If you want to try some of these classes out that you're talking about, we have a farm you could teach at. So they get to the land, and they realize the land is dead. It had been a sod farm for about a decade, and the sod farmers had been tenants. They'd produced sod and sold off that slice of topsoil every time they roll up sod and ship it out. When that land was dead, they moved on. They found another piece of land, and they then the next renters were Christmas tree farmers. They work a little deeper down, right? So the top layer of soil was this compacted clay. The next layer down is what the Christmas trees ate, right? So they used that up, and when they were done, they moved on. And now we're talking about a foot deep of just solid gray clay, no more topsoil. And the next farmer had really struggled, right? She had tried livestock, she'd tried all kinds of different things, and it just wasn't working. And so she was moving on as the Farminary was saying, you know what, we're going to try using this as a classroom space. The reason compost was so valuable and such an important lesson for us as ministers is Nate Stuckey, the director of the farm, he's saying, I hate to break this to you, but a lot of our congregations are going to look like this too, right? A lot of our soil is going to be really tightened up. It's going to be clay. What it means to care for a plant, to harvest, all of that means caring for the soil first, right? What's happened in our soil over a generation has meant neglect, meant not attending to what the next generation needs, the whole cycle of life and death. And learning to be good composters means you will be a good farmer. You can grow healthy soil, you're going to have a healthy farm. This was obviously one of the things that we said all the time. That'll preach, right? Over and over. This was just a space where illustration after illustration, metaphor after metaphor started popping up. We brought in chickens. That was our solution for the dead soil. Chickens have pretty magic poop. They're really, it's very nitrogen dense, very rich. It helps they break the soil up by pecking, and then you move their chicken tractor around and they sort of turn the soil over. 10 years later, it was really fun this past week to be on the campus again and see all the incredible growth. It was unseasonably warm, some concern around that, but that does mean we're getting tomatoes, we're getting some really amazing crops late into the season. I don't think it comes as any surprise to you that I experienced personally the theology of the cross and the compost pile, right? That's where the word made sense to me. I'd read it, sure. I'd read Bondage of the Christian, Freedom of the Christian, Bondage of the Will, all these like traditional texts, but to read it with your feet in the compost changed the way I could hear the gospel, changed the way I could understand what it means to be a minister, what it means to be a Christian. That was sort of the basis of what I ended up working on, and why I'm really here today is I wrote my thesis on context, on buildings, on the built environment, on architecture and theology. And it came out of this experience at the farm. These are raised herb beds that I built my final semester at the farm. What we noticed while we were going through compost, going through all these classes, is that the herbs were struggling. They had been planted next to a grove of trees in the shade. The previous tenant had planted herbs in the shade, and we are not brilliant farmers. We were just watering them, hoping they would grow, and they didn't. They didn't grow. We're like, why aren't they growing? We're tending to them. We're doing everything you can. And then Nate, the director of the farm, he's like, well, maybe we should move the beds. Maybe the shade, there's no amount of good cultivation work that will help them grow there. So this is a diagram I put in my thesis because this is that important of a revelation for me. I was like, okay, there's the barn, there's the regular gardens, and you can see the old herb garden down by those trees. No matter how much we tried as farmers, beg your pardon, we could not help that garden bed grow. They were not going to grow there. We had to move them out. We had to move them closer, one, to the path of traffic, right, where we routinely went, the desire path of our bodies, where we could remember them and see them and harvest them and not let them go to seed and all that. And that took some work. That was uprooting and moving live plants. That wasn't great, but it did work. It did function. It did get the job done. And once Nate had helped us with that diagnosis and we could see, this is why this bed is not doing well, then everything made sense. Then the rest of the strategy fell into place. Your problem might be similar to that herb bed garden. That's why I bring that up, or to this compost problem. Right? These are metaphors, these are images, but these could speak to something that maybe you're dealing with, right? An herb garden that won't take, right? Or maybe did at some point and now is sitting in a very different situation. And our calling is to be those diagnosers, right? To figure out what's going on here. How do we cultivate the growth that God wants for this community, for this congregation, for this neighborhood? Like I said, I wrote my thesis on theology and architecture. The question that really sort of got me is very similar to this Winston Churchill quote that I hope you've heard of before, right? We shape our buildings, thereafter our buildings shape us. This idea that for some reason, me being at the farm helped me perceive things that I couldn't otherwise. And similarly, being in a building, being in the classroom experience at Princeton, made it hard for me to understand things that otherwise, in a pure theoretical realm, I should have been able to be a rational mind and understand. It just wasn't working that way. And I wanted to pay attention to that. And so I started thinking about buildings. I started thinking about the built environment and where our bodies are when we worship, where our bodies are as we live, especially beyond and outside of the realm of financial assets or commodities, the ways we're used to thinking about the building. This is an example of the question that interested me. So when you look at this door, what do you see? Right? Have you ever seen a picture of a door like this? Or have you ever encountered a door like this? Where you encounter the door and you go to push it, because that's a horizontal bar, right? You should push that bar. And it's a pull door. Sorry, you made a mistake. That shape of the handle doesn't match how you're supposed to interact with it, right? There's a mismatch there. This kind of door was noticed by a theorist who's a software designer, who's a psychologist named Don Norman. He wrote about this problem, and therefore these doors are now called Norman doors. And when you start looking for them, you'll see them everywhere. Doors that they're designed improperly, right? Like you could, if you want, blame every person who uses this door the wrong way and say, well, you're just moving too fast. You just got to pay better attention. I would say, no, it's a door. I think it's okay to say sometimes doors should just operate the way they're supposed to, and we don't need to read instructions for doors. The psychology behind this is a word called affordances, and what's happening here is a misaligned affordance, right? So it's inviting you to interact with it in one way, but that's not the way that will actually work, right? That is the affordance question that emerges here. This is coming out of a big realm of psychology we're not going to go into, but the idea is that an affordance is not a property baked into the physical environment. It's a relationship between you and your environment, right? Similar to how the herbs didn't grow in the shade. Shade isn't a problem. Shade can be fantastic for plants that need less sunlight, but for plants that need sunlight, it doesn't work. So you have to attend to that. You have to move out. Similarly, a twig, right? A twig, the affordances of a twig for a bear are food, right? They might eat bamboo or something. But for a bird, that's a perch, right? These same objects, these same spaces or forms can work differently depending on your abilities. The world is interactive, right? God is giving us spaces, and we're reading them and learning how to interact with them. This is a form of pedagogy of the natural world. This door handle is what I would call a design problem, right? Where the affordances, what it's designed to do, and the way we interact with it are not aligning anymore. There's something wrong here. There's something that's not right. In Christian theology, we tend to blame individuals when they use something the wrong way or when they make a mistake, right? This is, for as much as the doctrine of sin gives us, this is perhaps something that is a design problem in the way we think about sin. It's not enough to just blame someone for using that door wrong. You actually have to fix the door, right? You have to redesign the door. Maybe you put a panel that doesn't let someone pull when they push. Then they just know to push. Or in this case, maybe take that off and put a grab handle so people know when it's vertical, you tend to pull it a little more, right? That would be a more generous or gracious response than just putting up a sign and saying, you're an idiot, do better next time. These signs remind me that we actually have a lot harder work to do than just talk to people. There's actually some building work. We have some design work ahead of us. I would say a design problem is when, this is a church one. A design problem is identified by when many people keep making the same mistake in the same place, right? So it's not like one person's ability is the problem or one person's intelligence. You know, it's easy to shunt a problem onto an individual, but if the same thing keeps happening somewhere, think about your building. If the same thing keeps happening somewhere in your building, that's a design problem, right? It's not just a teaching problem. It's not an education problem. That's a design problem. That's what we're getting at today, that our buildings might be presenting a nest of design problems that we need to address. So when you think about that question of where is the pain, where are the design problems? Things where, you know what, I don't know if it's fair to just ask people to do better. Maybe we're just too far from our congregation, and that long commute is a design problem. It's not a matter of will, not a matter of education, patience. All of that we can do, right? But loading up that burden when there could be a design solution could make all of our lives a lot easier, right? We don't have to read that sign before we pull the door every time. Here we go. When many people make the same mistake in the same place, that is what I would call a design problem. So, I'm not a minister. I'm not an ordained minister. I am a realtor. I've kind of buried the lead on that. I'm a little embarrassed sometimes to bring this up, because real estate is not what I had in mind for myself when I went to seminary. I thought about architecture school after all this. I thought about a PhD. Who doesn't? But when I was thinking about my neighborhood and what people that I knew really struggled with, it was housing. It was real estate. It was struggling to figure out how to pay for, afford housing, how to deal with a landlord, right? How to navigate the buying process. And if there's anything I learned from the compost pile, it's like, don't be afraid of paying attention to places where people are really struggling, that really stink like death, right? A lot of people were rent cost burdened, right? Paying more than they could afford on rent. And so I've become a realtor. This isn't something that I'm really attached to. No, I am a minister. That's what I care about. I'm in real estate because it offers a space to have these conversations with people about your design problems your life orientation, what you care about, what you believe in, and how it fits into your built environment. And that's what we're doing here today, right? So we're trying to help you think through, is your building at this point, like how are the design problems more than you can bear? Are they solvable, or is there some bigger solution we need to think about? My favorite story from the Bible that gets on this is this chapter in Mark 2. When he returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home, he being Jesus. So many gathered around that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door, and he was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by the four of them. When they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and after having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Child, your sins are forgiven." That's a design problem. Do you see it? Right? The roofs are not a problem in general. They had a healthy roof. How many of us would give our left leg for a healthy roof that doesn't need some repairs? He needed to be with Jesus. The roof was in the way. At that point, that becomes an affordance that's not serving the person in need. And so those friends saw that. They cut through the roof. They brought him to Jesus. That's ministry right there, right? I hope you understand. I'm not. I don't know, maybe they will say, that the building is fundamentally the problem. No, we're talking about the fit. We're talking about, does your congregation, through the people that you minister, fit in this ecology that they're now dwelling in, living in, trying to find belonging in? The building might not work anymore. We as pastors, yes, if Jesus is there, I'm cutting through that roof, right? That would be a joy to be able to bring that person to Jesus. This is hard to bring to you because I don't want to overstate that these buildings are just problems to us, right? They've also been home. They've been both at the same time, right? That your building has been a great place of stories and tradition and love and community, and also maybe you've got a long list now of the design problems that are showing up with your building that you need to solve for your community to be healthy. I would recommend that at this point, this first stage in moving into what your property transition might look like or what you do with your building, listening is the first step. With every architect, every designer, the first step is talking to people about the problem, listening to what their experience is, right? We may be able to imaginatively project, say, I think I know what's happening. I think I know what these people are dealing with. But that's not the same as actually listening. Or listening to the building itself, watching how people interact with it. Where are the, if you're struggling to come up with, where are these healthy places in the building? Take a look, pay attention, look around. You'll probably start to notice some things. This is one of my favorite pictures as a realtor. I took this in secret because I didn't want to interrupt the moment, but this was a home in Wallingford. I was helping the young couple as buyers. I was the buyer side. And the sellers, they were very interesting. This was a house that had been designed by an architect. He taught at Penn. He lived out in Wallingford and took the train in the R3 back then, or the R5. I don't remember. He had sold the house to this family, and then this family was selling to now the third owners of this house. It was about 100 years old, each generation, and really lived their whole lives in this house. This was a meaningful house to them. And I had not met the sellers before this, the final walkthrough. You've bought houses, I imagine. Final walkthrough is a really important moment. This is sort of where the buyers get to see the house, make sure everything's in order, and then we go to settlement directly after. The sellers reached out to me personally, not the selling agent. The sellers asked for my number and reached out to me and said, would it be okay if we came to final walkthrough? And I said, well, this is unusual. This is uncharacteristic. What do you want to do at final walkthrough? They're like, well, we're saying goodbye to the house. We're moving into a retirement community near our kids. We'd like to just welcome the buyers into the house and walk them through how to use the house. And I asked the buyers, and they were like, okay, let's see what happens. Let's see what that's like. So during that hour-long walkthrough, which is much longer than a usual walkthrough, usually it's like 5-10 minutes and you're done. You just check that there's no leaks, nothing's missing, everything's in the right place, nothing's stolen. They walked them through how to use the fireplace here, how to change the screens in the windows, where the water drainage patterns on the land went. They talked about stories. This is where kids had slept when they were babies. You're still having kids. This may be a good baby room because it's not too loud for your other kid who may be in this room, but you'll be able to hear them directly above you. Like they just walk them through the rhythms of the house. I've never experienced this before since. It got really emotional because at the end of the walkthrough, we were at the front door and they were like reluctant to leave, right? Because this is the end. This is their last time in the house. They're handing off the keys. And they were describing when they had all their kids back, right? They have 3 kids. They brought their kids and their grandkids back to the house before they left, just a week previously. And they'd gone room to room and shared stories about what had happened in those rooms, right? I asked about if these walls could talk. Well, they did that, right? And they let each kid tell their story of like, oh yeah, this is a moment when, we drank a little too much while you were gone or whatever. And the parents were learning some things about their kids. But that's the house, right? The house held all of that. They, of course, as the parents, as the owners, as the people who had paid that mortgage, had a specific relationship, but so did everyone else. And they made space for them to bring those stories in and share. This is what it meant to us. And to say goodbye together, right? To lay that down together and say, the house is for someone else now, right? Someone else is going to come in and raise their family. And that was really meaningful. So I was ready to just pray, I'm like the minister, but that's not appropriate. They were not people of faith. They just were very sensitive to the needs of this house and what this family was doing. But that I bring to you. We don't have many sacraments, any sacrament, relating to physical place in Christianity, right? We have a bunch that attend to the individual, but as far as a building, you're kind of innovating here, right? If you are at this point where you may be saying goodbye to a building and handing one off, I'd say put on your pastor cap, really think about what that could look like. My example that I would give is this, right? What if you had a reunion? What if you brought people back and said, let's share, let's be thankful together, let's tell these stories, let's welcome in this next owner or this next person, let's hand those keys off with integrity and respect and say, we really trust what you're about to do. This building has served us so well. Thank you to the building, and God bless, right? That was a really meaningful moment. Because these buildings are not just buildings, they are homes, right? This was an office above a Woolworths. Do any of you remember Woolworths? Woolworths is long gone, and I imagine this building is still there, right? All of these stories, these amount to our churches, right? These are very meaningful experiences, very meaningful places. And so I hope you can be pastors through this. We're about to give you a lot of technical details. We're about to talk about budgets, developers, zoning. We're going to go through all these different things. It's a lot of technical material, but we wanted to start today just reminding you that you are first and foremost called to be pastors. No one else will do that work. That is your job. And you are the one who will be walking this congregation through what is ultimately a very personal and emotional, extremely emotional experience of whatever you're about to change, whatever you're about to do differently, whether that's staying and doing something differently or leaving and doing everything differently. Be the pastor, right? Be that one who can bring people to Jesus regardless of what the building is letting you do or not letting you do. So in the same way that like when we started working at the farm as farminary students, we started hearing the gospel in a new way, right? We're like, we just did not know that this is what the land does, and therefore that's why God interacts with us the way that God does. You are about to be welcomed into one of the great traditions of Scripture, being displaced, right? Moving from one place to another. Is there a more common story in the whole Bible than God saying, time to move on, time to go somewhere else? I'll be that leader, I'll be that pillar of smoke, pillar of fire, or whatever, but you're not going to stay in the same place. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I'm in the lead. You're going to be okay. That might read very differently to you in these next few years. And I would say preach that, bring that, listen to that, dwell in that. It's very uncomfortable, but I'm excited to see what that looks like for you. This is a goodbye, right? For a lot of us, this can feel like a loss, like a set of deaths. And also we know that in those deaths, that's where our God shows up, right? That's really where God is active with us. So pay attention to that. Do not run from that. Be sensitive to it. That pain is very real, yes, but that's also something God is using. So I would give that to you. Thank you so much. We're going to take a break now, I think. Is that correct? 15 minutes for questions. Okay, I've talked for 41 minutes and 53 seconds. Lord, give you a few minutes for reflection. I haven't been that long. Do you have questions? Are there things you'd like to bring up? We have a microphone here, I think for the sake of the recording, that could be helpful. But I would welcome your questions or feedback. Go ahead. Great to meet you. Mm-hmm.
Question is, we have four properties. Our try to figure out how we're going to use this space to continue the ministry in the middle of
Mm-hmm.
this.
Yeah.
Four. So the years that I've been there, unity, see the space to gather. We have a house that I think we need to do.
Hmm.
So I would like to know our recommendations there. I have many ideas, but I don't know which one is the best idea for the house, the main building, the parking lot, and a garden lot that we have.
Yeah.
To continue the ministry, and I know it's going to be in a different way.
Yeah.
Because that is what is happening. But my question is, every time I get there, what I'm going to do with all this?
Yeah. Remind me of your name.
Lisette Rios,
Lisette.
Pastor Lisette Rios, New
Great.
Creation Lutheran Church.
Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
The successive conversation that we will have after this will be details about this,
Okay.
right? Examples. What have other churches done? What have other retreat centers, seminary
Okay.
campuses? Robert will be presenting a list. It's like 40-something stories. We're going to look through a lot of different examples. We, as a team, we know how to interact with developers, how to talk to the real estate side, how to work with capitalists, to think through financing, to think through design, all of that. What we cannot do is what you've already started doing, which is listen to your community in the way that you as a minister can, and the trust that you have. The ways that people will share their story, share their needs with you, that is your job.
Okay.
That is what we are really, really hoping and praying that you will do well. Because
Okay.
the better you can do that, the more than all these other pieces that could come in, all these other team players who are ready to help you figure out this problem, we might do something you don't want, right? That happens all the time. Churches sell or they move or they agree to some situation with a developer that is not actually ultimately in line with what the congregation needs.
Okay.
We could blame the developer for that, but we have to remember sometimes the developer just doesn't know, right? We just don't know what the church needs. And so the best thing right now, like I said, is to listen, and you've already been doing that. So we're already off to the races. Thank you. The rest of what we're going to talk about will be details. I imagine you're itching to get down to, okay, well, this is my deficit right now. This is the timeline. These are the people I have or that don't have, or people who are at this age and readiness to contribute, all of that. We're about to get a lot of that. This beginning, really, I just wanted to give you some pastoral resources, right? And to remind you, really, don't take your eye off the ball. You're a pastor. You're not a real estate developer. Unless you want to join the team, I guess. But please, the congregation, the people, that's your responsibility. I hope that's clear. That your call is not changing. The specific kinds of obedience are. Yes, Jesus may ask something very different from you now than in the past. But that doesn't change with all these technical shifts. That's something else. Any other questions? Yes.
So mine's a little bit more theological
Go for it.
And less practical. So in lifting up that sense of home that a building can be for people and all those stories, and I do want to honor that. But where's the line between that and idolatry? You know, that's what I struggle with, because I think we've all experienced, or I've heard people say, I won't worship in another building. Like, the building is more important than me worshiping God. And I'm like,
Hold on. Now.
what are we doing?
Yeah.
We've completely forgotten why we're here. And the building becomes the mission, and the building becomes the identity, and not the living God that we serve. And so how do we thread that needle between honoring that sense of place and that sense of home and all that history with worshiping what we're actually here to worship and not something else?
It's a great question. I have tried to handle that very lightly, very light touch in this talk. I hope you've sensed, right? I will not go fire and brimstone on the buildings. I think Robert may have more interest in that. Robert is ready to really lay the hammer on yes, what does count sometimes is idolatry. If you're interested, there are plenty of historical preservation groups that would be happy to welcome your energy if you're really ready to worship the building. And I think theologically, like how you preach this is, I mean, the curtain of the temple was torn, right? There is not a specific holy place where God resides and all of us must gather to encounter the living God. No, we're Pentecost people, right? The Spirit has blown through and welcomed us from every nation, every corner of the globe. I would preach that. As far as how the emotional reality that it is just hard to leave home. It is hard to say goodbye to a place where this pew, this seat has been mine. That oak, that's where I sat, right? I don't know. I'm young. I have not lived that, right? Let alone lived ministering to someone with that. And what you might be encountering may be less theological and more just an emotional and personal experience. And that I trust to your instincts as a minister. As far as like the building being, we're going to talk about historical preservation, but it's very common for community members, city neighbors, people to say this building is valuable to us as an as an architectural edifice. We want to keep the facade. We want to keep the steeple. I've struggled to see the justice in that because you're the one paying for it. You're the one who has to pay for what they're asking for as a civic good. So I would prefer they chip in some of that money, to really bring, put the language behind their aesthetic, their money behind their aesthetic preferences. But I wish I had a better answer because I haven't led a community through this. But I would say attend to the emotions. It may be brought to you as a very rational, very consistently thought through argument. To me, I hear someone who's just very deeply, and can be very healthy to be that emotionally attuned, but it can be unhealthy to ignore that as an emotional experience rather than, again, obedience to what God is doing. That's separate.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, and I'm from Redemption Lutheran in Philadelphia.
Welcome, Jennifer. Hello.
And I'm going to be the problem child all day. I promise. I'm just putting it out there. With what you said, and anybody else that has this sort of thing, what would happen if your church would burn down tomorrow? Then where are they going to work? You'd have to go someplace else to worship. Yep. Your assigned seat is no longer there.
Yep.
You're going to have to find someplace else to worship. Sorry, that's the way it goes. So, therefore, you have to be open to worshiping someplace else. It doesn't have to be a fire. It has to be, whatever. I've been at churches that have closed, that has done whatever. That's how life goes.
Yeah.
There are changes. We don't have to like them, but they happen. I'm in a church now in a transition type thing. I've run from churches in transition that has opted not to really face those issues. Mm-hmm. It's hard. This time around, I'm really trying to stick it out and help people get through them. It's hard. It's hard to put that right foot, do the next right thing. Yeah. It's not easy. Not easy in life. It's not easy with churches. With everything you've said, with what you're saying, when you were saying, you know, the plan to this, to that, I know you're going to give me some answers that, or at least give me directions or suggestions. So I'm really thrilled about this today.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate you. How about one more before we take a break?
Let me start off by just giving you a brief background of myself, and then we'll get into some nuts and bolts. And I'm going to try to answer at least one question that you have in your mind. Okay? My name is Ken Staley. I'm an engineer and a minister. Okay? I have been an assistant pastor. I've been a pastor. I have been over a group of pastors. I spent most of my adult life as bivocational. Okay? How did I get to where I am now? I was assistant pastor in the church, and another pastor came to talk with me because he had hired a contractor to do work in his church. The contractor was doing a lousy job and kept asking for extras. And the pastor asked me to come over and meet with them. So I told the pastor, what I'll do is I'll come over and I'll be a fly on the wall. So I was somewhat dressed like I'm dressed now, but I had on a sweatshirt. And I just sat in the meeting. And I just listened to this contractor lie, bend the truth, break the truth, and the leadership of the church was saying, okay, and he was putting paper in front of them saying, this is extra, and they were okay, we'll take it to the board, get the board to sign it, and we'll pay you. After he left, the pastor and I went into the pastor's office, and it was just the two of us. And I told him, I said, this guy is ripping you off. And I went back through examples of what he had said, and I said, number one, you guys are adding to your building, and none of you can read a blueprint. So all of you are believing what the contractor is saying because you can't read a blueprint. We then called for another meeting with the contractor the next day. I told him who I was and gave him my background. And bottom line, at the end of the meeting, he agreed to give the church back some money and to complete the project within the budget that they had established. And that's when I came to understand that this is going on in our churches all over the place. Out of that, I started continuing to pastor and continuing to work with churches to help them to determine how best they can utilize their building. Now, why do I do this? I do this because we're the body of Christ. And God has called us to disciple, to change lives. And most of us have church buildings that the church building itself is draining us. You know, when we look at our budget, the biggest number in our budget is maintaining the building. And what we do is if it's not something we have to address immediately, we know we have to set money aside because it's coming. And this whole process is, how do we do what Jesus called us to do in Matthew 26:8, if in fact we are putting a large part of our budget into maintaining a building? Now, I go back to what my sister here said. A lot of us If the building burned down, we just go join another church. Correct? Y'all are looking at me like, what is he saying? Y'all know what y'all would do. Y'all go join another church. Y'all not going to say, well, let's go to this corner where the building burned down and let's have worship service on Sunday. We're going to say that's too inconvenient. Even if we know that we are called to that community to serve that community, we're not going to continue to serve that community. We're going to join a church where they have air conditioning, where they got a nice parking lot, okay, where they got nice lighting on the outside of the building, because we want to be comfortable in our service to the Lord. See? Y'all want me to go sit down? You want me to go sit down now? Okay.
In Philadelphia, you can only go a couple blocks, and there's another Lutheran church too.
Yeah. Well,
So,
you know,
I'm just saying there's a lot of Lutheran.
there are a lot of Lutheran churches, there are a lot of Baptist churches, there are a lot of Presbyterian churches. But what I deal with and why I do what I do is because of what Jesus has called us to do. He has called us in this dying world to evangelize and to disciple. That's what we're supposed to be about. We're not supposed to be in love with a building. You know, early church, they met in homes. Before that, if we go back to Abraham, they were meeting in tents. You know, every so often they fold the tent up and they move along until they put the tent back up. We have become enamored with buildings. We don't look at a building as being something God has given us to do ministry with. We look at it, this is my home. I know, you know, I don't know how it is in all of your cultural churches, but I know, you know, in the black church, if this is my pew, every Sunday when I come, I don't want anybody sitting here. Because this is my pew, and this has been my pew because it was my mother's pew before me and my grandmother's pew before that. So you can't sit where my pew is. And we have forgotten what God has called us to do, and that is to do ministry. Okay? Now, one of the issues that we deal with is change. We don't like change. We like worship service to be the way it was the first Sunday. We want it to be the same way on the fourth Sunday. We want it to be the same way on the 1st of January, to be the same way on the 31st of January. Okay? Now, recently, I went to a church, and the church, the average age in the church is 37. They have 2 worship services a Sunday. The first worship service starts at 9:30. They have a line outside the building waiting to get in. The second service starts at 11:30. When you're coming out from the first service, there is already a line for the second service. Is that your church? Are the people in your community so hungry for the word that they will stand in line and they will park as much as 5 blocks away to come to the church to hear the word of God and to have a transformation in their lives? What is it that we are not doing that God has called us to do? I'm not talking about the building now. I'm talking about what is it that God has called us to do as his people in this dying world that we're not doing. That this church can be overflowing with people, and I can have a church where you can lay down on the pews and go to sleep if you want. If you did ministry one way pre-COVID, you can't do ministry that way post-COVID, because you're dealing with a different mindset in all of our community. Right now, you can wake up at 9:30, keep on your pajamas, turn your television on, and surf and decide who you're going to listen to. And if you listen to somebody for 10 minutes and it doesn't sound like what you want to hear, you just go ahead, click it more times, and go to somebody else. Why is it that that process of us worshiping God in God's house is not predominant in our church? There is something that we as believers are not doing that God has called us to do, that especially young folks, they don't want to come to our building. What is your purpose as a church? That is the first question that you have to answer. What is your purpose as a church? Does everyone in your church understand the purpose of your church? This is more important than your building initially. Because if you don't understand your purpose, and your purpose is not tied into the pastor's vision, and that is not what he's preaching from the pulpit, then that church is going to die. And as it dies, then you're going to find problems with money and keeping the church alive. I was just talking with, there's a brother in here that I'm working with right now. He realizes that his facility is not meeting the needs of the community that he's serving. So, I don't know how we got together. I don't know if I reached out to him, he reached out to me, reached out to Bob. But the bottom line is we have come together, and he has 2 buildings next to each other, and we're hopefully we'll tear them down. We'll put his sanctuary on the first floor. We'll put senior housing on the 4 stories up. So now he's meeting the needs of his community with senior housing, and he still has space to do worship in his community. Now, y'all may say, well, that sounds so nice. It comes down to having a plan to meet the needs in your community, have a plan that ties into the ministry that God has called you to. I sit with churches every week, and most churches, they just believe in doing things the way they did it in 1951. There is no change. If they start change and the pastor brings it to the church, then the leadership board or the congregation says, no, we ain't going to do that. Why are we not going to do it? Because we are comfortable doing ministry the way we've been doing it since Jesus ascended. And this whole process is that we're supposed to be about what God has called us to do. Let me give you an example. If you're ministering to singles today, that's a special ministry. If you're ministering to children today, based on the impact of media on their lives, that's a special ministry. If you're ministering to grown adult people that are married, that's a special ministry. 50% of Christians now are getting divorced. Why? Because they don't understand what the Bible says before they say, I do. And that's what the church is supposed to be doing. You should not go have marital counseling where you go see the pastor twice and you're okay to get married. Because you don't understand anything about marriage. Most of what's in your head is propaganda from what you've seen on television. We have a specific ministry that you need to understand that we're not supposed to be doing ministry like the world. Now, why did I go there first? Because then, if you understand what God has called you to do in that local church, then you can fashion your building, you can fashion your ministry to meet the needs of the community. Some of us have, and what I do is you call me, I come to your building, I walk through your building, but the first thing I ask you for is, what is the vision of your ministry? What is the purpose of your ministry? That I ask you for before I walk through the building with you. Because sometimes you just have one understanding of this building that you've had since 1890, and because you can't see past what you've been doing consistently, you can't change what you have in front of you. And I'll walk you through it, and you tell me what kind of ministry you want, and I show you how you can possibly do that ministry in that building, and the resources outside of the building that you can bring into the building. I was talking with a pastor, and he says, we have a daycare center in the building. And through the daycare center, we are doing outreach. And if your child comes to our daycare center, we reach out to the parents. Because our process is to get the parents saved and get the parents into the church. That's one way of growing the church. Now, some of you may say, well, you're talking theory. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay? In Philadelphia, not too far from here, when I came out of seminary, my MDiv is in church development. I went into a church that had 61 members. My wife was 62, I was 63. 20 years later, we had 5,600 members. Evangelizing, discipling, meeting the needs of those that God has called us to serve. It can be done. You have to understand the purpose of your church being in that community. Because if God put you there, he knew in eternity past what he wanted you to accomplish there. It's whether you want to do the work. Being a church member is not an easy job if you want to do ministry. Most of us want to go to church on Sunday, maybe come back on Wednesday for Bible study, maybe come back on Saturday for a program, and that's all we want to do. But that's not what God has called you to. Now, that was my introduction. Okay. Let's get into now some engineering and church building discussion. When you look at your building, you need to first define how much of my budget am I putting into this building. Your budget is the general maintenance of the building. Your budget is the heating of the building. Your budget are those things that are broken that you don't have money to fix. It's nothing more upsetting to me to walk into a church where the church has moved from the sanctuary to the fellowship hall because the roof is leaking in the sanctuary. But I'm going to go to a point, but I want to back this point up since it popped in my mind. Sometimes you got to be able to say uncle. You know what I mean by saying uncle? This building is just too much for us to handle. And we need to work out a plan to move out of this building, but stay in the community that God has called us to and continue to do ministry. That takes a elder board, deacon board, congregation that's saying, we are committed to this ministry, to this community, because this is where God has placed us. This is where God wants us to evangelize. This is where God wants us to disciple. This is where God wants us to be part of the transformation of the community. Once you make that commitment, if the building is something that really you can't handle anymore, then you need to talk about with a realtor, with an engineer, how do we step away from this building but stay in the community? Is it that we tear the building down and put up a smaller building? Is it that we sell the building and know where we're going to go in that community when we sell the building? All of these things are things that you need to put into practice with yourself and your elder board. But the thing that is important is that your pastor is giving the leadership. You know, I know sometime we have churches, because I pastored a church where I was considered to be an employee. The session called the shots. Okay, and we fought every month because as pastor I had a vision that God had given me, and they wanted to keep standard. They didn't want nothing to change. You know what? Some of them end up dying. Some of them ended up leaving the church because I just kept praying for them. And so God just moved them so that his vision, his plan would go forward. Now, if God has called you to this location and made you part of this congregation, then it's your responsibility to see that you're supporting your pastor and his vision, because God has given him a vision that is far beyond his life. When God gives a vision, it's longer than one man's life. And you need to be coming alongside of him like Moses, holding up his hands so that the vision of that church is completed. Now, let's get into some things. The first thing that you deal with after you know what condition of the building is, you have to do a demographic of your congregation. How many people in your congregation are on fixed income now? How many are on Social Security and that's all that's coming in? How many people in your church look like you? And I'm not talking about skin color, I'm talking about on the top. If you got a church that everybody's gray-haired in it, there's something wrong with how you're doing evangelism and discipling. After you deal with a demographic and you know how much money is coming in, because I want you to understand, what you see in offering is not the money in the congregation. I don't know about it, and I have to put it this way. I don't know about it in the white church, but in the black church, they give to what they want. You say, hey, we're going to take a bus trip to Washington. Even some of the poor people will have the money for that bus ride. And they may not be giving in the regular offering. So you have to come to understand those that you in your congregation and where they are financially. Okay, you have to also understand the demographics of the community around the church. What is your circle of influence for those that you want in the church? Are you looking within 5 miles of your church building? Are you looking within 2 miles of your church building? And then you need to know the demographics of those in that area, because that will affect how you will do ministry to them. If your church is in an area where you got a lot of young people that have small new families, then you have to customize your ministry to those people if you're going to stay in that building. If you say, hey, it's the 23 of us and we're comfortable every Sunday. But if you want to do ministry, you have to understand the demographics of the community you're trying to reach, and then you have to be open to programs that are going to reach those in your community that are in that age group. And then you have to also develop a process of evangelism. If you're going to stay in the building. If you're not going to stay in the building, then you don't have to worry about this. You can just do whatever you want to do, because eventually the church is going to die. Then in this whole process, you have to have a 3, 4, 10-year plan on how you're going to do ministry going forward. Tied into that is, what are the present needs and what are the future needs of the church? As the church grows, the needs change, and you need to be writing down what the present needs of the church are and what the future needs are in 3 years, what the future needs are in 5 years, what the future needs are in 10 years, so that you are budgeting and you are projecting things going forward. Okay, let me go to my last area. Each one of you have a building, and no building is the same for any one of your churches. What you need to do is have someone other than yourself that's not a member of your church come in and analyze your building. That person that analyzed your building, if it was me, I need to know what kind of ministry you're doing. Because if you tell me you're only doing ministry on Sunday and on Wednesday, you can be in any building. Matter of fact, it's better for you to shut down the building and go and take space in the Marriott every Sunday. But if you're going to do ministry, you should have an outline, not in your head, but on paper, what you're going to do, and it should be something that the whole congregation has committed to. And if they've committed to it, then your building could be analyzed based upon the ministry you want to do out of it, and that person that's doing the analyzation can tell you you can or you can't do it, or this is what you need to do in order for this building to work. I got some other points, but I'm going to stop for a second just to see if you got any questions. Okay, no question. Let me ask you a question. How far would you go for a glass of water? How far would you go if you needed a glass of water? A block? Walk a block? A mile? You know, if the water was a mile away, would you walk that mile to get that glass of water? I don't, whether you're in the desert or whether you're in Germantown, it didn't make any difference. The point I'm making is that we have a large group of unsaved people in our community, and they need the water of life. And the bottom line is your church helping them to meet that need? The day of people just walking in your church that are unsaved and want to hear the word of God, that's, I would say, it may be that many people around now. But, because I can remember when I was a kid, we would see 10, 15 people every Sunday that were new just walking into the church. That doesn't happen very much anymore. It is our outreach into our community. It is us having a plan to evangelize the community that God has given us and be willing to change our ministries in order to bring people in. And I'm not saying doing things that are, away from Scripture. I'm talking about doing scriptural process, but being open to doing it in a different way. Now, the point, and I'm going to stop here, if you need to have your building analyzed, I do that free. It just comes down to you got to give me a paper showing what your purpose is, what kind of ministry you're doing, and what kind of ministry you want to do out of the building. That's part of my ministry. I'm stopping there. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. If you got a strong voice, you don't have to walk off.
Thank you so much. Can you talk a little bit more about the process of the planning? In hearing more about the process of making that 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan. Who do you do outreach to garner the needs and the interests and the desires of the people impacted?
Okay. It first starts with your pastor's vision. Then it goes to him being able to communicate his vision to his or her, Oh, we caught up in that now. Okay. Everything that I will say going forward in reference to pastor, let me tell you now, I mean his or her, okay? Okay. Okay. It's him having the vision, him being able to communicate the vision first to his senior board, him then being able to communicate the vision from the pulpit to the church. This is a long process because he has to then work through the process of making sure that what he has communicated to his board and to the congregation that they have bought into. Okay? It is nothing more disruptive than the pastor having a vision and the church says, we ain't going there. And congregations will tell the pastor, we ain't going there. Now, once the vision has been cast and has been accepted, then it comes down to, okay, now, how many committees do we have to have in order to break this vision up into parts that's easily eaten and put it to work? And then who will be over these committees to report back to the pastor what is going on, how is it being done, and it's being done according to first Scripture and the plan that he has laid out. Okay? And then there's always continual follow-up, and then there's always, when you get down the road a little bit, you look back and say, do we need to make any changes to what we started doing and change little parts of it so that we are still doing it the way God would have us to do it in the way the vision the pastor has given us.
Yeah, and I guess developing that vision, I'm hearing both speakers talk about the importance of listening and understanding what the needs of the community are.
Yes, that's the demographics.
Yeah, so I'm just curious about what methods people have used to garner that information.
I work with a United Methodist Church close by here, and their church, everybody in the church, or the majority of the church, were gray hair. Okay, and they wanted to start a daycare center. And the only kids they had coming to the daycare center were grandkids of the kids that were members of the church. And they lived a good distance from the church. So I said, let's do a demographic. And what it came down to is that there were 2 other daycare centers in the community that were meeting the needs of those between 21 and 45. That's why nobody was coming to the church. So they had to come to understand that the need that they thought was in the community was already being met by 2 other churches. That's why you got to do a clear demographic of what is needed in the community. And then you may find that your service is too long. Or that you do things in your service that to the average person doesn't make sense. And then you may have to have a class that is a non-committal class that says, this is the Lutheran Church. You can come here on a Friday night, spend an hour with us, come to understand our doctrine, what we believe, and then you can make a decision whether you will become part of the church after. Yes.
So Reverend Linda's telling us that we can break for lunch a little bit earlier, but I just want to add a few things to Ken's talk. First off, when I was a very young man, I was the director of the Student Christian Movement.
This is Robert Peters.
Yeah, Robert Peters. I was the director of the Student Christian Movement in my home city of Winnipeg. And we were actually the only ecumenical group in Winnipeg. So I got stuck hosting Dr. Philip Potter, who at the time was the head of the World Council of Churches. So I had to arrange an ecumenical feast. And he came in and he gave a talk that's been important to me all my life. And the name of his sermon was The Blessed Budget. And what Dr. Potter said, you go back to your church and you go line by line. And I went back to my church, First Mennonite Church, downtown Winnipeg, used to be the largest Mennonite church in the world, 1,500 members. Now it's 30. And I went through every line. Choir robes, minister, blah, blah, blah. Less than 1% went to the poor in the inner city neighborhood where we were. So you can imagine why there's only 30 members left. Okay? So that was a very instructive, powerful sermon. And that's economics. What Ken was talking about is absolutely correct. You go through line by line, and Potter made this point. This will tell you where your faith priorities are. Is it more important to have new ropes for the choir, the junior choir, the girls' choir, the men's choir? We had all those things. We had a full-time choir director. And it was like 10 times what we gave away to the poor. What we gave away to the poor every year was some Christmas hampers that we put together at the Mennonite Youth Fellowship. The second thing I wanted to add, flesh out a little bit to my brother Ken's conversation, is 2 true stories. When I got out of seminary, I went to the Associated Mennonite Seminaries in Indiana and Notre Dame, and then later on to New York Theological Seminary in Manhattan, where Ken's a professor, by the way. I came to Germantown Mennonite, which, by the way, been there since 1683. The meeting house is 1770. So some of you are talking about old meeting houses. I think we got you beat. So I walked in the door. We had 12 members, basically one family. And half of them left because I allowed my wife, Rebecca Stolzis, my ex-wife, back then to preach. That was a definite no-no back then. So they took off. They were too conservative to allow that to happen. But within a year, I had 100 members. My ex-wife and I developed 100 members. How? Very simple strategy. Shouldn't be seen as radical. We went door to door in the Germantown neighborhood, this neighborhood, and we asked people, what do you want Germantown Mennonite Meeting House to be, to serve you? What do you need? Tell us. And they did. They said, here's the trick. We want a hot lunch program for seniors. Come on in and have a safe place to have lunch every day. I said, great, but I'm not chopping up all the onions. I need volunteers. Guess what happened to those volunteers? They saw us putting our faith in practice, and they joined the church because we were actually doing stuff that was responsive to the community, which happened to be here in Germantown since 1683. The second story I'll tell you is going on right now. Ken and I and Wes, we've been consulting with various churches. There's one, it's First Baptist Church in Norristown. At least it used to be in Norristown. They actually took the keystone from 1872 and they put it in a 1970s building up north in East Norriton, which surprised me because this is a 1970s building. What's up with the keystone? They said, well, Norristown got a little bit too unpleasant for us. Maybe, too poor, didn't like the ethnic diversity, whatever it was. They moved to a 29-acre piece of land across from Norristown High School, which they don't do anything with. They mow the lawn, don't pay any property taxes. So they're dying. There's maybe 20, 30 people after COVID who show up on Sunday. They have no endowment. It's a big, massive building, which sucks up most of their money to heat it and air condition it. So we said, if you had a couple of $1 million in your endowment, what would you want to do? Ken's point. How do you see yourself in this church? Now, interestingly enough, they're a driving church. Nobody lives in the neighborhood. Across the street are all kinds of middle-class folks. There's a high school. Right? So they took some time, and they went out, and they knocked on doors like I suggested. And they came back and said, wow, there's all this need and pain in our neighborhood. Who knew that upper middle-class people were hurting? Shock. Who knew that the kids are struggling with all manner of things? So then they started amongst their congregation, wow, we could do this, we could do that. Yeah. So we have an offer on their table for, I think, $3 to $4 million for 5 acres. Because they didn't want to sell to all 29. Got to keep those weeds growing. Imagine, if you will, if you're in that situation where you had $4 million in your bank, where you could fulfill some of the mission that Ken is asking you to do: evangelism, ministry, hot lunch program for seniors, what I did at Germantown. Other churches work with young people to close the technology gap. Here in Germantown, during the COVID virus, the school district in Philadelphia bought laptops for kids. Right? Mm-hmm. There's all these social issues. I don't care if you're in extremely rural Pennsylvania, like our neighbors on the table, or if you're in Germantown. I guarantee you, there's pain of some kind or another, and there's a spiritual emptiness everywhere you go. Doylestown Mennonite Church, been around since 1740 in Bucks County. They have about 40 acres somebody gave them. Same thing, don't do anything. Now finally, after about 30 years, the pastor's retiring. He came to me and he said, Bob, I've got some really cool ministries going here. I'd like to see them endure. I said, well, you got the 40 acres, and across the street are multi-million-dollar houses. This is Bucks County, Doylestown, right? And to his credit, one of their ministries is offering a sanctuary and a support situation for sex offenders, registered sex offenders. Imagine how brave and courageous that is. Okay? And he wants that to endure. And he understands, and his congregation understands, they're with him on all this stuff, that's going to take money to keep the person employed, to keep the lights on, literally. So these are very real conversations Ken and Wes and I have with people of all faiths and denominations every single day. So before we break for lunch, I'll come back after lunch and start off the slide thing with Wes and I put together yesterday. I had brought this wonderful book I brought 2 copies to give to Reverend Linda and Bishop Penman. They told me they have it already. So it tells you that they're really with it. And I must say thank you to both of them, because I meet a lot of religious leaders who are really in denial about how bad things are. You know, I'm not that guy, and you'll explain more when we get into my thing. So I'm going to give out 2 of these books, but we're going to do it to the first person who can answer these 2 questions. So book for the first question, book for the second question. Let's see. Did you all go to Bible quiz camps when you were kids? Was that a thing in the Lutheran Church? You did. You did, but you're Pentecostal, of course. You You had.
We call it Vacation Bibles.
You call it Vacation Bibles? All right, here's the pop quiz. This is for book prize number 1. Endorsed by the bishop. You endorsed this book, right? Yeah. Exactly. And Linda, you endorsed. Yeah, it's good. It's really excellent. It'll be extremely helpful to you. They cover pretty much everything. Okay, what is the first? I'm saying the word man deliberately, because it was men, plural, who built the first religious structure, something for worshiping Yahweh in the Bible. What's the first description we have? That's question number 1. First description in the Bible of a human-made something. I can give it away. I'll give you a hint. 2 brothers. Who said Cain and Abel first, Ken? She did. Okay, Miss Wes, you want to give her a book? Okay. She's not eligible for a second question because you probably know the answer. Here's part B of that question. From that story of Cain and Abel, which were 2 piles of rock, they just threw up, and they prepared burnt offerings for the Lord, right? So what do we learn from that story? Is God a vegan or a carnivore? Which did he choose?
The meat.
He's not a vegan. He chose the lamb. Who said lamb?
Brother right there.
He gets the second book, Wes. Yeah, the interesting thing about that story is God liked the lamb. The vegan, who did, I don't have a third book. Which was which? Cain did what meat offering? Well, Cain was the vegan guy, right? Abel was, on top of it, he had the lamb burgers, the kebabs. It's the Middle East.
Yeah.
So,
Abel was the shepherd.
yeah, he had.
Cain was the farmer.
Yeah, there you go. So not to knock any farmers or vegans, but that's just one of those early stories which we have in the Old Testament. So lunch is waiting for us. Ken and I will spread ourselves around. We won't hang out with each other like we normally do, so you can have a crack at us over lunch. And when lunch is over, yes? Oh, the title of the book. It's called Gone for Good. The editor is Mark Elston, E-L-S-D-O-N. I think the Linda and company will put this on your website. So you have a website. Maybe.
Oh yeah, I don't think that's up on the website, but I do recommend it.
Yeah.
As does Bishop.
Yeah. So, lunch.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here on this Saturday when I know there are many other things that you all could be doing. Thanks for coming and taking part in this wonderful experiment that we are hoping really blossoms into something that helps to not only revitalize our congregations, but infuse life into the communities that surround our churches. So we're going to have lunch next door. Everybody is invited to come for lunch. So please come over, enjoy lunch. We'll meet back in here at 1:05.
Okay. Welcome. We're going to try to zip through this PowerPoint in 30 minutes or so, and then devote the rest of our time to your questions and answers. But this is going to give us some perspective on choices that have been made, are being made. So, of course, the person who won the prize will tell you that this is the first religious structure in the Bible. This was it. 2 piles of rocks, barbecue and vegan. Of course, the next description would be what? Abraham and Isaac, same thing, right? Except a human sacrifice instead of a lamb. The third is Moses coming down from the mountain with very specific, detailed instructions from Yahweh of what Yahweh wanted to build, which we call the tabernacle. You can see a replica, a full-size replica, if you care to, at the Lancaster Mennonite Historical Society. Go down Tennessee, you can see a whole ark. They built an ark, I think, right? Now, the tabernacle was it a permanent structure? It was mobile. It was like a mobile tent. Was it put in place every Sunday on a weekly basis? No. Whenever Yahweh felt he wanted some more land, he would tell the people wandering around the desert, erect a tabernacle. Was it a one-day thing? No. The worship could go as long as Yahweh felt he was in the mood for lamb. Then they would pack up the tabernacle and they move it around, right? Now, somebody had the bright idea to build a temple. Now, there's two different lines of thought on this. My professor, Norman Gottwald, who's a great Old Testament scholar, takes the point of view that the temple built by Solomon was really not something God wanted. What really Solomon was doing was, we've arrived. Everybody around us has big temples, many gods and goddesses. The Assyrians, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, everybody. The Hittites, the Canaanites, Egyptians. We got to have a temple that's bigger and better than the rest of them. Because we've come around. We got a king now. Remember, Israel didn't have a king for a long time. There's a whole prophetic tradition that was not necessarily so happy about the idea of a nation state. There was a different narrative floating around out there. So Jesus comes along. We'll see this in a second. Where did our Lord do most of his preaching? Yeah. Last time I read my Bible, he was on a mount somewhere. He was on a lake somewhere, and there's a boat. He was cutting on the roof, the West Mansion, making wine at weddings, so on and so forth. The one time we really hear about Jesus primarily, the one primary story about Jesus in the temple is about what? Throwing out the money changers. Right? I have found nothing where Jesus tells us to build a temple. Ever. And I've looked and I've studied. So, 300 years go by, and Emperor Constantine, quick church history reminder for those of you who all went to seminary, he becomes a Christian. Before Constantine, Christians like us were the halftime entertainment at the Colosseum. Guys like Nero, remember? We were illegal. We were marginalized people. We couldn't have buildings. We met in caves. You can go visit them under Rome. If you're ever to Rome, they're still there. So Constantine, pretty much overnight, becomes a Christian, turns the army, the treasury, the administration of the Roman Empire over to the Christian community. And as part of the deal, remember all those wonderful temples the Romans had? Guess who got that real estate? We did, including this building. You know what this building is? It's in Rome. No, not the Acropolis. You got it. Who said that? Way to go. That became, of course, a church. And they all did. And the funny thing is, the Christians cleansed. You can't have all these nude statues of gods having sex with sheep. As the Romans had going on, right? Or with each other or whatever. That was forbidden. So they cleansed all that out, pretty much destroyed Latin culture. There's a book, New York Times bestseller, where they found these books hidden away, Latin books, original Latin material. What survived from that era was hidden in secret libraries in the monks. Why were they hiding Latin porn? So you could write about sin. You had to have the original source material. Right? So the monks stashed this stuff away. And during the time of the Renaissance, scholars found these books, transcribed them, no scanning back then, by hand, and they started recovering what was left of Latin culture. The Christians had expunged Latin culture. Literally. So, except for a few small groups that would pop up every once in a while, like the Desert Fathers, and later on St. Francis. You ever see the movie Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon? My personal favorite from the 60s. The Waldensians, Peter Waldo, so on. They would go against that narrative. So there's Jesus. My background is Anabaptist. And This is a group of Mennonites doing one of our little tour things. It's the 500th anniversary of Anabaptism, by the way, 1525, where a group of people decided they believed in freedom of religion, which the Constantinian State Church did not agree with. That was, I'm not going to let you decide what to do. So they were forced into their worship spaces, which were literally caves, forced. For 150 years, Mennonites did not build a building until they became wealthy in Holland. And of course, they built church buildings. But for a long period of time, we met in caves and forests, much like base communities are still doing in Latin America, people in Africa are still doing right west. The idea was, it's the community, not the building. How we love each other. How we try to be good disciples. The other stuff is sort of irrelevant. And maybe not such a good idea. It's some of our thinking. So John Wesley Wilson, actually John Wesley, and Charles Wesley, when they started the Methodist Church, what was it? They were meeting outdoors. They had their meetings on fields. They were going to the poor coal miners in Wales. Sunday school was set up by the Methodists to help poor coal mining kids get an education. They didn't start out by building all these Methodist churches down the block. First time Methodist church in Germany. They literally met outdoors, as did the Quakers. But that morphed into other buildings. So this is, on the left, church my parents were married in. Mennonite church was too small. This is St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, built in the 1880s in the inner city of Winnipeg, where I'm from. It burned down in 1969. I was proud to be part of rebuilding the new St. Andrew's Center on the site. Okay? Now, the church took their insurance money and they gave it to us. What is this St. Andrew's place? Which still exists? Upstairs is low-income families, senior affordable housing. The first floor is a room like this. Sunday morning, quite literally, now the United Church of Canada. Canada, we merged. Everyone kind of got together. The Protestant Muslims. Okay? They roll out a pulpit. The pastor comes out. They put the chairs around however format they wish. During the week, that space is AA meetings. That space is a food court. That space is whatever the community felt it needed to be. In the basement, we ran a health clinic. I lived next door. I thought about becoming a Franciscan. 4 o'clock prayer in the morning. Celibacy. No. But the brothers ran a health clinic. There was a garden. And you know what happened when you mixed it? The big mistake with senior housing is when you isolate the seniors by themselves. Some of us here are seniors. You had the grandmas taking care of the kids. Because it was a multi-generational affordable housing project. And the church/community center. So yes, I became inspired with that vision when I was a young man. And I thought, well, isn't this cool, use of the land? So another cool example, go the other way here. Oh, maybe go back. Yeah, this is one of the churches in your tradition. On the left is what it used to look like. St. Peter's. Who's been to St. Peter's in New York City for the jazz concert? So you know, right? They tore down this unsustainable building. They put Citicorp on top of a beautiful modernist church that runs all kinds of programs with the money they got by converting that to this. That's a great model. It's a real model. Down the street, the building in the front, unless you look up in the air, which most people don't anymore because they're on their iPhones. This is like 24th Street. That was a church of some kind. I forget the name. I think Serbian Orthodox or something. But behind that is a 30-story New York University dorm building. They kept the facade. We called it facadectomy in my business. And then they threw this thing up behind. Now, down the street here, oops. Wes, it's jammed up a little bit. Yeah, just down the street, a couple of blocks, is the Mount Airy Presbyterian Church. About 2 years ago, they sold it to a developer, person I know actually, and they literally gutted the inside for condominiums. They took the roof off, and they put up another series of penthouses, and the Presbyterians moved to this little chapel area down there. Okay? So they could have viability and resources to do whatever they're doing. I'm not exactly sure, but, and I will also point out this is not affordable anything. They're like almost $1 million a condo. Now, the other day, I was driving up to Bethlehem, PA, pick up an antique I got on Facebook. And I'd never been to Bethlehem in a long time. And I was on a road that came down a hill, and there was, whoa, this beautiful steel mill rusting away at the bottom of the valley. And right on the hill were these guys, St. Stanislaus Polish Catholic Church. And right next door, they built affordable housing on their parking lot for artists. Yeah, you can designate affordable housing. You can do it for any number of targeted groups. Seniors, artists, whatever. I will say, and it's in the book we mentioned earlier, you've got to run a lottery. There's a story there about a developer trying to con the church by telling all their members to move in. No. When you take government money, you have to run a lottery. It's part of the deal. Now, this is, whoops, again, sorry. Where's my Wes again? I keep touching. Tap what once? Oh, yeah. This is the beautiful historic home of First Baptist Church. It used to be First Baptist. They sold it to, I don't know, some sort of RCA church. It's packed. They got 300 kids there on a Sunday morning. They don't have any parking. They use the parking garage around. But their Sunday school annex, we're exploring with one of my clients, Gilbane, putting up a 33-story building where the Sunday school annex was. And that would give them a lot of money to pay their heat and their utilities. They want to reconfigure their space to offer more to the community that they have in mind. But they've been very strong partners in the conversation about what we do with the building. A long time ago, I was a friend of Sister Barbara Leninger, who passed on. She was the president of Dominican College in Rockland County, New York, and I helped them put together a project where they sold surplus land, turned it into affordable housing. One of my professional jobs, another one of my professional jobs, was at the Union Grove Missionary Baptist Church in the Bronx. Of course, the pastor put his name on the apartments. And he added a parking lot for his new car. So the church is going to come down eventually. But we, at the end of the day, we've already built 300. We will build 400 apartments, 100% affordable senior housing. The lottery thing was hilarious because I meet with the church ladies every week for what they call Kennedy fried chicken. And they were so concerned that there was a lottery. People not from the neighborhood could get there. In fact, they were concerned about whether gay people would come to South Bronx. I have a lot of good gay friends and partners. I don't think they're that dumb to move to the South Bronx. Kind of a danger. But yeah, I have to advertise in the gay news and the Chinese news. I'm in a partnership with the government when you do affordable housing. The government is our partner. It takes a special patience and skill set to deal with those things. I've done that for 50 years. I built about 5,000 units of affordable housing already in my career, and I'd like to do more. I met this minister 20 years ago up in Phoenixville, Episcopal Church. Again, surplus land becomes affordable senior housing. Nice guy. Unfortunately passed down. Now here's a story of what not to do, in my opinion. When I first came to New York City in 1972, the Bowery was the Bowery. People sleeping on the street, mainly old white guys, drunk as a skunk, we used to say. I'd step over the bodies. They'd be living upstairs in these really crappy so-called hotels, really a couple of baskets. So the Bowery Mission, you've heard about it, they've been around like, I don't know, the 1880s, but they own about 10 buildings in the Bowery. Across the street, the Salvation Army had a place called Booth House, which they sold to a friend of mine for like $50 million, because the Bowery is no longer the Bowery. There aren't any poor people in the Bowery. There's $10 glasses of water from icebergs in Norway. You know, that's the thing over there, right? So I've been trying futilely to get a conversation going with the Bowery. My point simply being, guys, take 20, 30, 40, $100 million and move where there's actually poverty still. There still is, out in East New York and so on. But the Bowery, gone. Goodbye. Not happening anymore. So they have real estate. I don't know how to keep it alive, but they are. In the same token, here's a wonderful project called the Lutheran Settlement House. Part of the Settlement House movement. Remember Jane Addams and all those people? Bowery Mission was part of that mentality. You know, do a lot of good things. Teaching English. Some not so good things. They were teaching immigrant women to be seamstresses and work in factories because they thought that's all they could ever do. But Lutheran Settlement House, I don't know, 150 years old, something like that. Been around. And if you know that neighborhood, next door is all these upscale restaurants and condos. There are no more poor people within walking distance of the Lutheran Settlement House either. Not anywhere near. So I tried to engage the Lutheran Settlement House people. Folks, take a rather large check, move up to Kensington, where Wes will tell you, if you have never been to Kensington, that's the Bowery. Human beings dying in the streets, fentanyl, heroin, Lord knows what they're putting in their bodies. They're just abandoned. They're not going to the Lutheran Settlement House. So I say to them, well, think about selling the building, taking the program to where it can be meeting real needs. Years ago, I ran into these guys. This is Tivoli, New York, near Rhinebeck, New York, in the Hudson Valley. Little Episcopal Church. Again, converted their land, senior housing. Affordable senior housing. Now, here's another story that concerns me. Briefly, I was a member of the Arch Street Friends meeting. I like Quakers in a lot of ways. But one of the frustrating things was this is built in 1804. Next door is Franklin's grave. Okay? Behind it is a parking lot. You see the parking lot behind the meeting house? Right there, parking lot. Across the street is a 7-story Holiday Inn. Now, the Quakers are dying. They've lost half their membership in the last 10 years. They're in real trouble as a denomination. Meanwhile, they're sitting on this land, totally free, rarely use it for parking. So I said, for 30 years, let me bring in a development team and let us build you something. Maybe some of it's affordable, maybe 20%. But it will give you the money. They're losing $300,000 a year subsidizing this place, and they don't bother to do a return on investment. They say, well, this is an important mission. Okay. There's actually any of the tourists who come through Arch Street join the Quakers. You ever track that issue? No. Why would we do that? Don't get me started. But here's the other sad reality. You know what's underneath the Arch Street parking lot? Quakers don't want you to know this. There's about 30,000 people buried under the parking lot. From the yellow fever in 1797, they just threw people in the grave. Slaves, indentured servants, whoever was dead from the yellow fever. Washington lived up here in Germantown, house down the road. He didn't want to be nearby. He gave up his downtown house. So they came up with that, and I said, there's no plaque, there's no nothing. I said, look, my friend Rodney Leon is a Haitian architect from Yale. He built something in New York. The feds found a slave burial ground on Wall Street. So they brought Rodney in. They did a whole religious thing for the dead. They built a little memorial museum, blah, blah, blah. It all worked out. So I said, Rodney will come in. I'll pay for him to come in and talk to you. We could do the same thing here. We could do affordable housing, create jobs. The city of Philadelphia would get taxes. The dead would be properly mourned and memorialized. No interest in that conversation. So when I say to Bishop Penman and Linda that you're willing to have these conversations, I mean it. Sometimes people just are not. It drives me nuts. So we talked about this church. Stuck again, Wes. Just leave Wes here. I think I touched this thing on the left. Sorry. I must touch. Yeah, that's what I'm touching. Yeah, remember I told you about First Baptist Church in Norristown? See all the land they own? 29 acres. And on the other southern side, you see all the housing. Across the street, the other way, is the high school, Norristown High School. So yeah, we're engaged with them now for 2 years. We have an offer on the table to buy a couple acres, a lot of money, around $4 million, to put in more housing. We'll give them an endowment where they can deal with identified ministries. And it tends to work here. We were talking at our table. It's harder when you don't have a lot of land in rural areas because you don't have water and sewer. They have water and sewer, obviously. And they have zoning that allows you to do 15 houses an acre. Right? So again, everything is driven in the development game by the site conditions. Like, is there a burial ground underneath the ground? So years ago, Eastern Baptist Theological Seminary was downtown. They moved to a hotel out in the main line, this place, which about, 5, 6 years ago, they sold to guys who made luxury apartments, not affordable anything. They took the money and just skedaddled out to Eastern University, David. Across the street is St. Charles Borromeo Seminary, which also sold for $34 million to mainline health systems. They're going to turn it into something. Now, one of my favorite religious groups, although I can't join because I can't grow a beard, are the Amish. And what I didn't know about the Amish until fairly recently, I actually got invited to an Amish home for dinner. What an honor to do that. Normally the Amish don't want us interacting with their kids because we wear worldly clothes. Particularly Ken, you would never get invited. But I'm just saying. So I got invited to home, and they said, "What do you have this big living room for?" So that's our church. Every Sunday, they literally bring the church benches to different homes. Like, remember the house church thing? Acts 2 and 4, first known description. The Amish still honoring that in real terms. Now, in the book, there's a whole chapter on the experience of Arlington Presbyterian Church. And let me read you part of it, if I can find it. This is a story about their congregation in this book. They, the church, had a strong hunch they needed to toss their nets on the other side of the boat, jettisoning long-held expectations, assumptions, and long-practiced ways of being church. One group imagined an act of God destroying the building and replacing it with affordable housing and new church space and a coffee shop. The vision of the future excited us and energized us as we imagined it was possible. This was a turning point. Arlington Presbyterian Church allowed themselves to go into deep, holy waters where they realized something radical had to be done with the church building. Their attachment to the crumbling physical structure limited their power, their ability to act as followers of God's word. This is a real example. This actually happened. It's in the book, whole chapter.
Robert said, the cross on the right, Google Maps, that fell off the top of the building. They were there watching.
The fellow who edited this book, Mark Elston, went from Princeton Theological Seminary. Was he a classmate of yours, Mark? Oh, okay. But he went to this whole Presbyterian church that had a parking lot that was dying, and he got the Presbyterian denomination, Bishop Penman, to invest the money to build 250 units of affordable housing, which then also allowed them to restore the church, and there's multiple programs going on, right? What's some of the stuff he's doing there? Drug rehab and student housing. And what's that? Student housing? Okay. That was the thing. Okay. No, but again, why sit on an empty parking lot? You know, because you can build it. And it's a good investment. For all of us who have big pension funds, like the Mennonites are offering to put money up behind some of the stuff that we're doing, because they have a real estate portfolio. You know, who knew, right? But this is the kind of stuff you can do. On that theme, this is interesting. Some of you up in the Quakertown area were talking about. This used to be the Rocky Ridge Mennonite Church, permanently closed. They left the denomination. Now they're trying to be something else. But right next door, you see all that housing. Literally next to their property line is Lennar Homes, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 for a starter home. And I was surprised, quite honestly, that Lennar did not buy the 15 or 20 acres that Rocky Ridge Mennonite Church has right next door. I think it's inevitable. Yes.
Can I testify to that? Sure. Vice President of Quakertown Ministerial. also had eight campsites back there with full utility. And we were seriously interested in getting a hold of that because we looked at it and said, that means we could potentially have a site for a tiny home community. There's all that land behind that could be, if you could bring the utilities in there, you could really do a neat tiny home community there. And we explored that option with the congregation. But one of the reasons that they decided to sell the property instead to was because of that development, because they realized that the township would not want the that development in their backyard.
Yeah, the old NIMBY.
That kind of needs to be stated. Yeah, I know that's sort of personal.
No, that's what we want to. We want a good, honest dialogue. Yeah. I'm glad you shared that. I didn't know that. All I knew is when I went out there to look at the church, because my insiders told me they're leaving the denomination. So my friends were leaders. And then I sent me out to look around. And I saw the guys next door. Why are they sucking up all that land? But your idea is a good one. Sure. You know, if we have a chance to build tiny homes or homeless housing or first-time homes, we should grab it. You don't always have a chance to do that because you see the home prices Lennar's getting, right?
Oh, heavens, yeah.
And they're the quote-unquote not Toll Brothers. They're actually affordable compared to Toll. Toll would not come to this site. But no, Toll's like $1 million plus.
Oh, I know.
I'm just saying, these guys are like 4, 5, 6, right?
But trust me, in the greater town area, there are all kinds of developments going up where the Lennar, I know, is more like 450 grand.
Yeah.
Still, I just
That's first-time homes for our generation. These are two Methodist churches downtown, very typical of all kinds of churches in downtown America. Reading, Norristown, doesn't matter. That's Archstreet Methodist. Across the street's a 50-story building. Archstreet Methodist needs $10 million to restore their steeple. I met with the Methodist bishop. Unfortunately, he moved to Nigeria. He was a really good guy. He really understood this. He asked us, could my guys build a 46-story building? It so happens, yes, we can. Have. He said, well, could you save the facade? Yeah, we could save the facade. Could you give us a community center? Because we run like a hot lunch program once a week, whatever. Yeah, sure. You guys don't want to merge. Well, 10 blocks to the south is Tinley. You don't want to merge the two churches. Fine. Tinley is set up for what, Ken? 3,300 people? 3,000. How many go there on a Sunday morning? About 280 people. And they've been trying everything they can think of. They have organ concerts. There's actually a foundation. If any of you have organs, sorry, that's almost done. Right? They have a foundation out in Wayne, Historic Organ Preservation Foundation. So these guys have a world-class organ. And they're trying this and they're trying that. Ken and I have been consulting with their people for years because they have a parking lot in the back that they're trying to figure out what to do with. Well, you know this church. That was bought by Ken Weinstein. I know Ken. The church is, what did they put inside the church? On the back is a bunch of doctors. What are they using the sanctuary for? What's that? A bunch of doctors? You know, unfortunately, from a development point of view, you can't really touch the cemetery for the obvious reason. Yeah. So here's Ken Weinstein again, down the street. He bought this old Episcopal church and renovated it for the Waldorf School, which he stole from Mount Airy and moved down to Germantown. He did $4 million restoration. He used his historic tax credits. So churches don't always just need to be housing or condos. Sometimes it can be doctor's offices. Sometimes it can be a Waldorf school. This is the Lutheran Student Center. I'm not current on what's going on with their land, but years ago, I met them. Because, you know, they're what, a 2-story building? Something like that. Yeah. And I'm like, guys, next door is our, tall buildings. So same conversation. Sell me the building, take a break for a year, come back if you want to, and we'll do something. Another Baptist church down on Christian Street being ripped apart as we speak. Ken and I knew the pastor. They're making it into condos. This is a project some friends of ours worked on in Langhorne United Methodist Church. The thing about affordable housing, Took them 5 years to get money from Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. That's 100% senior housing next to the church. Now, when I was in New York City, oddly enough, I was a good friend of a guy called the Canon to the Ordinary. Yeah, I'd get all the gossip you ever wanted about Episcopal priests. Trust me. John and I would get together and I'd hear about all the, stuff. And he looked at me one day and he said, Bob, the cathedral's running out of money. Because they were on this 100-year plan. They had, in this yard, they had stone. The kids from Harlem are doing, medieval stone carving, right? So I suggested some things. I got a development team to come in. And they built all around the cathedral, all around the corners, and the side yards, Columbia University student housing, which probably keeps the lights on at the cathedral. Talked to you earlier about Doylestown Mennonite Church. There's the land. Why are you guys looking at land? Same with the Salvation Army building. Downtown, they have a big piece of land in the front and the back, right on Broad Street. About 4 years ago, I had done the Gonzaga Retreat Center in the Hudson Valley from the Jesuits. You been there, Werner or so? So I went out there with the Wind Company. And Father McGowan is the treasurer of the East Coast Province. Because I read an inquiry that they were closing it. I said, hey guys, I bailed you out of a retreat center in the Hudson Valley 40 years ago. Oh yeah. We all went out to Wernersville, but the halls were too wide for affordable housing. One of the reasons they closed it down. Remember what the heating bills were? Exactly. So the guys next door bought it. Did you know that? Yeah, the upscale senior housing people next door bought this building and, 200-300 acres of land. I think so. Yeah, I'm just saying. But again, they weren't my clients, but I have clients like that. When I first moved here to town, did anyone ever go to this building? I was there for one of their last dinners 40 years ago. When I got back here, I looked and it was empty. I said, New York City, we wouldn't put up with this for 2 seconds. It's right downtown. But the history, that's Father Divine. He held all kinds of real estate. That got sold to some people we know. They turned it into different things, hotel, apartments, so on. This is St. Basil Academy, which is over in Jenkintown. Yeah. It's a St. Basil Basilian Ukrainian Catholic folks. They had a school, Manor College, and the high school, St. Basil Academy. They just made a deal, as it says up above, with Toll Brothers to put in senior living homes. And what Toll Brothers means by senior living homes are 55 plus, not affordable. They don't care about affordable anything. That's not their thing. These guys are up in Bluebell. They've been there since 1810. Boehm's United Church of Christ. About 5 miles up the road is Wentz's United Church of Christ, same denomination. They're down to about 5 members on a Sunday morning. They've got a cemetery. They've got 5 acres. We've been engaged with them with what would we do with the building? Who knows? Personal residence, quilting store, build something on the 5 acres. Actually, give the money to the UCC. I'm sure they could figure out something to do with it. In Yonkers, New York, Bernie Glassman was a friend of mine. He ran the Buddhist Society of New York. He bought this old monastery, filled it with homeless people dying of AIDS, and he made a deal to build a bakery down the river where they got jobs. To this day, their main thing is baking brownies for Ben and Jerry's. They cut them up in Yonkers, they ship them to Vermont, it becomes part of Chunky Monkey. Okay? So when we're talking about mission, it's not necessarily limited. It could be economic development. It could be the community needs a bakery. Who knows? So we know. This is something the Franciscan sisters built in Peekskill, New York. The nuns kept the front part for themselves, and they put up some very nice upscale senior living on their land and some homes for sale. Fordham University in New York, right next to the church by the Metropolitan Opera. Boom, apartments, tower. This is in, where is this? West, remind me. It's down south somewhere, right? Emory? Yeah, Maryland. The church down there had land, and they developed it into affordable housing. Ah, yes, my home church. You see the church? Next door are the 2 towers my grandfather built. Sitting there, I told you, 30 members from 1500. Funny story I'll tell you quickly. Between the church and the tower was a little sliver of land, which you can barely see. It's that small. It was a barber shop. and he wanted too much money to sell it to us. So he finally got older and older and older, so he started a really cool rumor. He was going to turn it into an adult bookstore. And like that, we have 4 parking slots for the minister. It's a true story. Germantown Church of the Brethren, the first church in America, built 1725 down the street. I helped them do their 300th anniversary. Again, they have land in the back. They have a building on the side there. They're just a lumber supply place. Land in the back. Cemetery you can't touch, of course. But again, they're struggling. Like everyone else. Here's a funny story. Got to tell this one. Greenpoint, New York, I was invited to the Transfiguration of Our Lord Russian Orthodox Church. I'm ecumenical. So I went in and I said, guys, what's wrong? And they said, well, our roof is caving in. If you know anything about the Orthodox, they're all about icons and stuff. I said, okay, so show me what you got. So you'll notice behind the church, on the other side is McCarran Park. Behind the church, right behind the south, see that green space? That's the park. And the building next door, that's where the part-time priest lives in a 10-bedroom house. Nice job, right? So I said, guys, I'll put up a 30, 40-story building on the land, and I'll build you a tall building. The priest can have a new hot tub, condo, penthouse, whatever he wants. Let's make a deal. And they said, well, we played in that park when we were little kids. We have once a year selling pierogies festival there. I said, really? Once a year? I said, I gave you a permit to use McCarran Park. So I gave him my card, and I said, when your roof caves in, give me a call. Calvary Methodist Church. The church was actually built to house the stained glass windows. They're in the north side of Pittsburgh. Any of you know Pittsburgh? I know you do. And I was, big mistake. They had me preach there one Sunday morning. And I walked in the door. There were all of 12 members in this 2,000-seat sanctuary. And they had a chapel on the side, but they weren't using that. They were heating and air conditioning this whole beautiful, I'll admit it's beautiful church. But so I didn't get invited back. So did Marcus get here at all? Hey, Marcus? No, so I guess it's me then. Time up? Yes? Okay. So now we're going to talk about the development process, quick overview, and answer your questions. So really the first thing you want to do, we talked about this, define the church's mission, internal stakeholder engagement, that's you, that's your members, that's your boards. Initial site assessment, that's me, if you want it to be me, and Ken, we're more than capable of coming to your site and telling you what is possible. Hire a development consultant if you want to, but you don't have to hire us, we're free. There's a group that people hire, I won't mention their names, and they pay $20,000 for a report by a non-engineer. We went through the Methodist Church after they got that report, and Ken found things falling off the roof and asbestos tile in the daycare that they sort of missed. So, conduct a feasibility study, that needs to be done. Explore your options. Risk and benefit assessment. Decisive making and governance. Engage the congregation. Legal review. Yeah, the one thing I tell churches, I just told them the other day, at the very least, you need your own lawyer to review it. Who knows real estate? Just don't get anybody you know in the congregation. Back a page, sure. This will be filmed, right? You good? The second thing I will tell you, when you get to a project, you want to hire somebody like Ken. That's what Ken was doing. He was the church's owner's rep. He was making sure that the contractors were doing what they were supposed to do. They hired enough minority people, if they were unions, that they weren't ripping you off with bad decisions on their part. Assemble the development team, site planning, entitlements and permits, develop detailed financial plan, negotiate terms with development partners. Now, let me explain that. Some developers will never be honest with you. The church I did in the Bronx, when you do an affordable deal, you get what's called a development fee. Remember that. It's a transparent number. You have a right to know what that amount is. It's a $30 million project. You get a $3 million development fee. The lead developer is going to say, I'm taking all the risks. I want the full $10 million. No, you're a partner in the project. You should be entitled to a piece of that development fee, as well as the sale price for your land. Be clear about it. If it's me or anyone else, always remember the you're in a stronger position you think you're in. So the church in the Bronx got 20% of the development fee for participating and the sale price for their land. Construction. Construction begins a year and a half. You might have to move someone somewhere temporarily if you're going to come back. Project completion, transition to operations, long-term governance. Feasibility study, we mentioned that. Extra question. Back up. Visioning. Well, the point about ongoing operations, look, let me explain it to you briefly. When you do affordable housing, you're using something all the time called the low-income tax credit. The low-income tax credit is bought by 99% shareholders, usually a bank, corporation. They're going to sign a contract the same day giving you the property in 15 years. That's the compliance period, we call it. You want to make sure that you've got that contract in your hands. Because 15 years from now, if you want to, you get to assume whatever debt is left, and you get to assume responsibility for the project. For the first 15 years, you own half of 1% normally. If you want to be the managing partner, the guy who's on the hook, he's going to insist that your people are qualified, which they can. It's not a big deal to become a licensed property manager. But if you don't want to, you just sit back for 15 years, see how the lottery turns out, put your money in the endowment, and 15 years you have an option to pick it up for yourself. Be it a new construction project or a renovation project. The other thing I will tell you about affordable housing in this state, unfortunately, they rarely do more than 50 units because they have little money. They don't give out much money for this at the state level, unless at the federal level, the way things are going, unfortunately. We want to spend trillions of dollars blowing up the world instead of this stuff, which is very understandable. People have been building affordable housing since the 1930s in New York City and beyond. There's all kinds of programs. I've used every one of them. Farmers' Home Administration existed specifically to go into rural areas to build 40, 50 units of working family or farmers' senior housing. It was a whole program that the FMHA had, not HUD. The state will have different programs. But there are experts like me around. I've spent 40 years working with government that know the ins and outs of this thing. So why don't Ken and Wes join me? Whose phone number is that, Wes?
Microphone. So we don't need to text questions. You can ask the questions. Let's do some panel questions. Come sit down. The way this will work, we are at 1:49, right? We have as late as we want. I would say let's not go no later than 3. And maybe we don't have an hour and 10 minutes stamina. But let's bring some questions. I'll walk around the room with this microphone. Voice your question. Ken, Robert, feel free to be detailed, right? You may have specific questions. Like we're starting to get into the technical details of what this looks like, right? This development process. I'm going to roll it back one slide.
By the way, if you need to reach me, Linda will send you my phone number. Because the next stage of the process for Ken and Wes and I is, if you're interested in going deeper and deeper, we have to get out to your church. And we don't charge you for our services. We kind of come out on our own. We hope that you might use somebody on our team, but that's not an obligation, just so you know.
Use the microphone so people can hear you. Is that good? All right, let's go.
I'm dealing with I'm Paul Jan. I've known as officially as the Holy Closer. My job is to close churches. It's not really my job. It's part of the Vitality team. I'm dealing with congregations in the southern part of Delaware County. They're all landlocked. Older buildings. Congregations are worshiping between 15 and 25 people. We've talked about, I gave him some visions of merger, working with other congregations. We have not talked about developing other uses for their buildings. And when you're landlocked, how do you get out of being just a church, you know? And I'm just not seeing these people having the vision or giving them the vision, because I'm not their pastor, of other uses of these facilities besides what they've always used them for. I'm not sure.
Well, I'll give you two real examples. Did a project a while back where we bought the house next door to unlock the land with a separate means of egress. If you can't do that, then you can't do it. Second thing I will tell you, we're working with a church in Upper Darby right now. They have no land, but they're right next to a parking lot the owner may sell at the right price. He has to sell at the right price. And the city has told us, Upper Darby has told us, if you do senior housing, we don't care about parking. You see? Because seniors, but again, your church would have to be near what seniors need to be near. What's that? Hospitals, public transportation, shopping, relatively safe neighborhood, you know? So there are solutions, but we'd have to go look at your sites one by one.
It's important that we walk through any of the buildings, because we can probably show you some things can be done with the building that you never thought about.
Who else has a question?
So the ministry could continue in the building, so the ministries could continue in those present buildings with some other uses happening within them.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. I was working on a building about a year ago, and what we saw was that on the first and second floor of their, what they called their Sunday school classrooms and so forth, that could be turned into senior citizen housing, one-bedroom apartments, and it was still within the envelope of the church. So they still had the sanctuary. They did not need all the space in the sanctuary. So I told them, you know, you can also put up a wall at the back of the sanctuary, which allowed the sanctuary still to have its normal look. And on the other side of that wall, we could put some classrooms in. And they were going for it, but their congregation numbers were too low for them to move ahead. I think they were seeing something like 23 people on a Sunday.
And yes, if you're thinking about having to, the Quakers have actually a formal liturgy for closing meeting houses. It's really neat. It's called laying down the meeting house. And you might want to start thinking about what that should look like in the Lutheran tradition. You got one already? Good.
Well, outside of the Quakers, there is a group out of New York City, and they come in and for $5,000, they desanctify the building.
I have a question for the two of you. We've talked about successful examples. What are common mistakes you see congregations make as they're navigating this process? What are some things that everyone seems to make the same mistake?
The first one is they wait too long. Okay, they say, oh, we got time. And the congregation continues to drop. The cost of operating the building continues to go up. And then in the one real telltale thing is when you sit there on one Sunday and you got 100 people, and then 6 months later you got 75 people. You know, then that's saying that the tide is going against you and you're taking too long to make some strategic decisions.
Well, I think I mentioned some. I mean, what I'll say about my home congregation, the mistake they made is they kept the German services till about 20 years ago. So from 1926 till 96, they decided we're just going to keep doing German. And this was a multi-ethnic inner city neighborhood. I went to school with 60 different ethnic groups, and they made no attempt to be relevant to the people around them. So is that maybe why they're down to 30 members now? Probably.
Related, one thing I've encountered...
One point was, if your church is an urban church, especially in Philadelphia, the way Philadelphia is now going through gentrification, they will let your church building just about fall apart and they will take it over by eminent domain or another reason, and then someone will come in and they will put condominiums in your church building.
St. Laurentius in Fishtown just happened. One thing I've noticed is sometimes the churches that I've worked for, we've confused goals with strategy, right? Like our church is diminishing, and then the lead pastor would say, well, we just need to grow. That's our strategy. That's not a strategy. That's a goal. A strategy is looking at the demographics, looking at the neighborhood, and saying, this is what we're going to do differently, and we'll measure it by growth. But the growth is not a strategy. Who else has a question? Anyone else?
I know from talking to you, you said you were going to send out emails with what information was given.
Yeah, we can pass all this to you in a document from an email after this event. So just make sure Linda has your email address and your contact information.
It was taped, so we can get something that we can view. Because I know everybody was busy trying to take
Right.
the last information.
Yeah, and we'll add some more details up to that. Some of us were good about using microphones, some were not. Yeah. All right, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Connor Watson. I am the pastoral intern at Atonement Lutheran Church in Fishtown, right around the corner from Lutheran Settlement House, and St. Michael's Lutheran Church in Kensington, though now the young folks want to deem it Old Richmond instead of Kensington. That's another story. In terms of this process here, with financing and partnerships, if folks are familiar with St. Michael's Kensington, we don't have a lot of people. Lately, we've been averaging 4 people on a Sunday morning. Those 4 people are feeding anywhere from 85 to 110 families on Thursday mornings in the food pantry. We have a building that's been around since 1872. We can't afford the oil heat. We can't afford the roof, all these things, but we're there. We're doing ministry. In terms of the financing aspect of these sorts of projects, where do you find that most churches are able to secure funds? Is it all grant funding? Are there soft hearts out there that say, yes, I want to help with this project? What's the realistic, move that churches you see make?
In your situation specifically, one of the issues you have is whether you are able to continue to maintain the building, because a church building, especially an old church building, it's like an accordion. When summer months, it expands. Winter months, it contracts. Every time it contracts, if you have a slate roof, those slates start to move up. If you have asphalt, they go down. And you'll be on the inside of the building and you'll see a belly in the roof. And when it gets to that point, they start to affect the structure of the building, and it can get to the point where some of the main beams of the building become damaged. So that's one. Number 2, if you want to stay in that location, you need to develop a plan. You need to be open to having a partner. Someone that comes to the table with money and understands your plan and is willing to invest in your plan if it's for 10 years, 15 years, knowing that they're going to get their return on the upside or the outside of it, but they're willing to participate with you because they see a change in the community, and they also see that you are building ministry so that they won't be stuck with the building. Because otherwise than that, they'll wait until it goes to sheriff's sale, they'll buy it and put condominiums in it and never think about you.
Okay. Let me try to answer your question more directly. The Episcopal Diocese in Philadelphia basically has their own investment fund. They don't need us. They have their own money. They're doing their own development with access to funds that's made available for that. Second thing I will tell you, a lot of times government gets involved, but the government's a difficult group to work with because they have limited funds. There's a lot of bureaucracy. The third thing, which is only viable depending on your location, is private money. There might be people around who want it for anything, condos, apartments, medical office, clinic, etc. We'd have to understand the property. But let me tell you a quick story. It's true and it's funny in a way. I once had a contract to house a lot of homeless people in the Hudson Valley. Guaranteed contract. The county government was paying me $300 a night to house a homeless family instead of in a motel. And I went to the Bank of New York, and I said, guys, I got this guaranteed contract. You go out and buy houses, don't have to throw anyone out. And they said, that's great, but you still got to put 10% down. I needed $1 million down, which I was with a nonprofit agency. We didn't have discretionary funding like that. So I'm like, now what? So I went to all the churches in Orange County, New York, everybody. Presbyterians, Lutherans, Unitarians, Quakers, Catholics, religious orders. I went to everybody. And they all said, thank you very much. Finally, I was down to one group. True story. I went to see Rabbi Schwab at the Jewish synagogue in Middletown. And the good old rabbi said, yeah, we'll put up $300,000, get you going. So what do you think I did after I got a commitment from the $300,000? I held a press conference thanking the rabbi and sort of snidely suggesting the churches might want to step up and join in, which they did. Amazing. So you have those three resources. Your denomination, they may have other funding sources out there, foundations, that world. Government world is probably the hardest one to deal with. There's Carlton over there. Did he leave already? Carlton left. We're working with Carlton on West Philly. It's a pain because it's the government, it's the city. They have limited amount of money, councilman prerogatives. There's a lot of corruption in Philadelphia, not just Philadelphia, Norristown, Reading, Trenton, so on, places like that. I've seen it. I've worked with people at that level all my life. And then, of course, depending on your location, maybe private money comes into play. Other questions? What's it?
Now, another part to your question, the only place I've seen it has been in the South, where a urban church develops a partnership with a suburban church to build ministry in the urban community. They're the same denomination. The church in the suburbs has a fund, and they give money to the church in the city. Certainly they have a contract on how things are supposed to run in order to do ministry together. But I've only seen that in the South. I've never seen that in the North.
Where a larger, more vibrant church partners with one that's trying to grow. So yeah, it's a good method.
Yeah, Elston in his book, the first book, not the one that I gave out today, he talks about how he convinced the Presbytery of the Great Lakes, was that the name of the thing, to take some of their pension fund money and understand it's pretty low risk to build a student housing. The Mennonites, by the way, have done that for a long time here in Philadelphia. If there's an emerging ethnic church like an Indonesian church or Vietnamese or Lord knows what, Chinese, what they've got going on, but they have a investment fund that they make available to help urban congregations too. Look, at the end of the day, it's a math problem in part. It's also a problem of land. It's landlocked. What's the access to? Does it have water and sewer? What are the local zoning laws? On and on and on. It's a puzzle. But some of us are pretty good at working with you at putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So hopefully at the end of the day, you're satisfied with the result. And I think if you were to check our references, they're pretty good. We're not considered to be bad people at what we do. There's no question.
It seems like these examples tend to be around a need for money and financing and fiscal viability. Do you have examples of it coming from the community itself saying, kind of knocking on the doors, we need this, we need this? Like, what is the connection to the community and their needs?
Well, most of the communities that need this kind of stuff are so poor. Where we're asking them to come on board is as volunteers and members of Habitat. They don't ask the people to put up any money, right? They ask them to put in X amount of hours to build the houses. That's their thing. So yeah, you can ask those kind of things. And you can ask friends of your congregations. If you don't have members in your congregation who are like engineers like Ken, or architects, or real estate lawyers, or even developers, you don't know what resources you have. Or you may have friends in the community. Your pastors might be going to a prayer breakfast with Mennonites and Baptists and United Church of Christ people, which is often the case in the rural parts of our area, right? But to answer your question, it's pretty rare that poor people have the means to meaningfully contribute to something. Although, let me say, Wes and I in particular, Ken too, we believe in empowerment models. We believe if you're going to build a home for sale, you make it part of a limited equity co-op or a land trust, meaning you can only get limited appreciation, so you fight back against gentrification. Same thing with apartments. If I were to build apartments in Upper Darby, if it's not for senior housing, let's say it was for working families, I would say in 15 years, you're owning this as a limited equity co-op. I want poor people not to be living in a plantation, which is basically what public housing is. I want them to have control and to join in the equity we almost all in this room enjoy. Yeah. And that's a doable thing. There's models all over the country where that's happened.
As far as this community connection goes, we as folks who work with development all the time, we will have ideas, right? We will have things, we know this works, we know this is what our team can do and all that. We won't know what your community knows. You are that connection, right? I've worked in a lot of churches, not many people bang on my door asking for things, right? You know, individuals, but as far as the communities, they're looking on the MLS for rental options. They're going to other business sources to find answers to their problems. That there could be a community group with a moral heart, like ready to give to the neighborhood, it strikes a lot of people as a surprise, a very pleasant one. And especially if you're ready to go through the work of organizing how it could be built to assist. Yeah.
I built 128 homes at 46th and Market. Those homes were built with a subsidy. Brand new homes, 3 bedrooms. They sold for $65,000. Those homes now are worth over $300,000 each. That money was called Nehemiah Homes, and it was a group of pastors that went down to the mayor and said, "We're not asking you, you will do." And they got the land and they got government financing to build those homes. So it can be done, and this were you know, pastors of small churches. It wasn't a mega church in the group, but they came together and they said, "This is what we need for our community, and you will do."
Let me say about Nehemiah. In New York City, my experience with Nehemiah, a lot of the churches put their own money into it. In the Bronx and East New York, not just government money, but they ponied up for the pre-development from their pension funds and their foundations. I mean, a lot of churches, I don't know about Pennsylvania, but in New York, take the Trinity Wall Street Fund. That's the Episcopalians. That's one of the biggest foundations in the world. And I used to know their grant people. And, you know, so it's not just foundations are secular. Sometimes they're religiously oriented. They will, if we seek them out, find funding for things. So, don't know what that looks like in Philadelphia. New York, there would be several.
Hello. So I'm from Trinity Lutheran Church on Germantown and Queen Lane, and we're pretty old. I haven't been there that long, but I know that my church needs some assistance with getting repairs, because I think our steeple is really old and all that, and I know that I don't really know, like, I understand the process here, but how long would it take after we do the vision and the strategic plan and for you guys to come out and look at our building to help us visualize or to see what it is that you guys can help us with?
Well, I know your church real well. You're right next to the Church of Brethren guy who printed the Bibles, you know. And I've often wondered, now you sold your parking lot behind the church, right? Okay, they sold the parking lot. See, when I first was snooping around that church, I said, my goodness, they got this parking lot. And Germantown's become sexy. You notice all the new apartments? So I have guys who buy that parking lot tomorrow and pay for you to repaint the steeple, which is in danger of falling down. Ken and I would tell you that in a heartbeat. It's easy to tell. And it's a beautiful church building. It's been there, when was it built? 17 something, right?
Wow.
Been there a while. But the problem you also have with the church building, tell me I'm wrong, it's a wood frame building, right? And wood frame building and our hot and humid weather do not go well together. Ken can tell you more about that. And that's a real problem because wood rot and expense and roofing. But Ken and I would come out as soon as you would like us to. We'd put it on the calendar and get out there.
How many members do they have now? How many members do you have now?
Well, we have online services. I guess we have about 5 buildings. So it's not a large congregation, but we're growing. So, and we're out in the community more. We're doing like prayer walks and all that stuff. We're actually having.
You got something to say.
And we're also having a community day on October the 11th from 10 to 3. So we're trying to get out into the community. Like I said, I'm fairly new and I'm trying to do what I could do to bring more people in. I mean, a couple people, one person joined for me talking about my church, and I went to the church because someone invited me, and that's how I started going there. I mean, I had always been in church, but I was never Lutheran. But someone invited me, I went, and I stayed. I invited somebody, they came, they stayed. So, just like we just have to get out in the community more, and it's like word of mouth with anything. If you like something, you're going to talk about it and bring people in. So we're hoping that this community day is going to bring the people out in the community and come in and maybe say, hey, a lot of people come past that church and say, we didn't even know it was open. So it's just because the presence wasn't there, but now we're trying to be there. I'm making sure that well, not me, but I'm there. I'm part of the evangelism that's happening.
Okay.
So I'm making sure they know that we are there and we're going to stay.
Well, if it's the building I know of, your interest is on Queen Lane.
It's across from Double
Okay. Yeah. And if you're coming down Queen Lane to Germantown Avenue, you guys don't have a sign that you can see. The building is there, but unless you slow down, you go past it and not know it's there. So one of the things you're looking at is, I would tell you to put a sign up so that people can see the sign as they come up Queen Lane. Number two, I will, you give me a call, I will come over to your building and I will do a visual assessment of your building and tell you where your steeple is and some other issues that you may have that you may need to address, before, you come back one day and find the steeples in the sanctuary.
Yeah. Wes?
See that lady back there behind you?
Yep. This is your chance. Feel free to ask any question about any subject.
This is actually more toward Pastor Manson and Bishop Penman. What are we doing in SEPA? What do we do about our buildings? Are we coming up with any sort of building committee or team? I know we're Lutherans, we love committees, but are we coming up with some sort of strategy in our own synod, recognizing all these urban churches and suburban churches that have these buildings? And I'm hoping this is just the first step of a larger plan or conversation that we can have, because I think a lot of us are in a lot of the same situation.
So yes, the reason why this building summit is happening is because we recognize what is going on with our churches. And no, we do not have the money to do all the things that all the churches need done. But we do have resources. Ken and Wes are some of the resources. This is an ongoing conversation. Our vitality team is under reconstruction. It is going to be a working team. Once I came on staff and realized that the vitality team was not a working team, I am extremely busy, and so is Pastor Bradley Gow, who is the chair of Vitality. So we need a working team behind us, and we are in the process of rebuilding that team. And a big part of what needs to happen, even though most of our congregations don't think they need to do this, which I am personally pushing, every congregation, unless you've done it in the last 2 years, really needs to do a vitality assessment. That's where the conversation starts. And that conversation starts with me. So that's just one part of what we're doing. I mean, we're going to do the best that we can with the resources that we have, and then we're going to offer you resources that we personally do not have, but that we know are available in the community and that will help you. And again, that's the reason for today. So you can look for more of these types of things to be coming, but also reach out to me about your own congregational vitality assessment so that we can do some work on that as well. And hopefully with all these pieces working together, we can have some good outcomes for our congregations in SEPA Synod.
Thank you. We have a question. Once you decide or you get the visioning, the strategic planning, and you decide that you would like to take, so in my congregation, St. Peter's in West Oak Lane, Philly, we have an education building that is butted up against row homes, so it's not a lot of space to work with. But if we said we wanted to do, some senior or some accessible housing or something there, then once it's built, once everything is done, who is the caretaker of that? Like, if the toilet break or something, who's going over there to plunge the toilet? Is it the congregation or the partner we partnered to build it with? Or like, who is taking care of this property?
Well, that's ultimately up to your desire, whether you have the energy and the desire to take on the property management. Otherwise, the developer do it. Now, Ken actually lives in West Oak Lane or East? He's in East Oak Lane, so he's in your neighborhood. And we've been working with a church next door to the library. What's the name of the church?
Refuge Evangelical.
And they bought an old church building that burned down. It's like a whole big piece of land crossing the library. Yeah, exactly. So Ken and I brought a development team there, and we thought we could build, what did we start with, 70 units?
Started with 70, came down to 44.
Yeah, because we met massive neighborhood opposition.
I was going to say that.
Yeah.
I told them people, and they build big giant mansions, were like,
Yeah, it was gonna throw shade on their gardens. Right. So you got to understand, this is not an easy thing. I'm pretty good, but I only bat about 300. There's always these weird things coming. You would think people in that neighborhood would recognize, hey, we've got a lot of poor senior citizens right down the block. We don't have to import anybody. And it's the church, for heaven's sakes. They're good guys. The pastor's a real sweetheart, reputable people. But now we're in the court. We're fighting zoning, the church and the developer. Are they still fighting? Yeah. They're still fighting. Years later. So sometimes you run into these things. And by the way, who was the city council person that didn't advocate for us? The mayor, Parker. Cindy Parker could have pushed that thing through. Sherelle Parker, right, not Cindy. Sherelle. So, I mean, I'm not telling you this is an easy thing. It's hard when you get government involved. The easier thing for Ken and I to do would go to the church and say, let's build some townhouses, sell them, give the money to the church, have scholarships, do whatever. Sometimes you just have to understand what you're going up against.
Hindsight, when we talked at lunch, the building that I told you about that you said somebody's doing something with it, the church building, if I were in your position and could swing the money, I would have bought that building and made it your annex building and did my, yeah, and use that building to do youth ministry, to do tutoring and so forth out of that building, and still had your regular church worship building. But that's hindsight now, because you can't get the building.
Hi, I'm Carl McClellan from Emmanuel, Norwood, and I have a question for, I guess, your leadership. If you look at the 140 or so congregations we have in our synod, there is some portion which will fall under the main topic for today about redevelopment or selling. There's also a whole lot of us that have older buildings that plan to stay in business. Is there any thought to potentially do some key topics that we could leverage across the 140, like HVAC systems that tend to be aging and be needing of attention in a lot of our churches? And instead of every church going out individually and trying to figure that out, is there any thought to try and leverage that for SEPA and make it a little bit more direct and a little bit clearer for churches instead of us all trying to develop it on our own?
Yeah, let me say that's certainly an option. Putting solar roofs on, geothermal wells, insulation, finding grants and funding to do that.
Yeah, so the solar doesn't work if you've got slate roofs, like a lot of us do. We've been down that road. But I'll bet you we all have a boiler, or most have HVAC systems. And the thought is right now, a lot of us are trying to figure out how do you repair, how do you keep them up. It would be really helpful so we don't all try and recreate the wheel on our own, to have some leverage and have some key resources that we could reach out to.
You busy next weekend? No?
Let me say
Yes, so that is...
1 second. Let me say this to you. You said it's 110 churches. If you did a survey, and let's say you came back and said 15 churches need to look at their HVAC and heating system, we can set it up to have someone to look at those 15 churches. You know, I just would not want them to come out to look at your heating and air conditioning system and you got a leaking roof because you can't financially support the ministry of the church.
So I am attempting to meet with all of our conferences, and part of the conversation around vitality when I meet with the conferences is how can you partner to do things more economically in this conference. So SEPA Senate itself doesn't have the complement of staff where there's somebody who can be dedicated to doing what you are asking. So what I am encouraging is for the conferences to work together. You form a small team or whatever, and do that work on your own with some support from the Synod office if needed. Unfortunately, many of the congregations think that the Synod can do everything. We cannot. It's impossible. Anybody, I'll share my calendar with anybody so you can see how busy I am and know the lengths that I have to go to just to try to help the 143 established congregations that we have. So that is an option. And who is your dean?
I have to collect myself here. what he's talking about, and what I have to call her Pastor Linda. I knew her when she was just Linda. We have tried this in Central Philadelphia Conference to do a conglomeration of all of the churches pooling resources. Let's check on having the same insurance company, this and that. So many people, we had 16 churches in our conference. So many people thought it was a great idea, but when it's time to respond and step up, we had 2 churches that responded. So the problem is, the desire may be there, but there's a fear, I believe, in a lot of churches. Well, I don't want to do this. If they don't pay their insurance, what's it going to do to my insurance? Or if they don't do this, what's going to happen to mine? We look out for self. We have to learn to come together and be united in what we do, and that's a big problem, not just in Central Philadelphia Conference, but in all of the Synod.
Okay. Let me say this to you, following on what you said. If 10 of your churches needed new heating, air conditioning systems, and those 10 churches had funding for their local church, and you came to me and say, Ken, I got 10 churches that are ready to upgrade their heating and air conditioning system, you would be surprised at how low a number I could get you to install it when I'm telling a contractor he's getting 10 churches.
And that's what you try to tell people, but they don't hear that. They just think of themselves and what's going to happen. Their people aren't going to go with it. So we just have to keep pushing.
Yeah, it so happens my wife is a very good minority woman-owned contractor. I don't just say that because she's my wife, but I would hire her all day long. She's got 36 Chinese guys. Ken can attest. She has to work on his house. Wes is having her put air conditioning.
She's doing my house next week. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but here's the point. We're not just developers and consultants. We also have smaller people like general contractors. And Ken's absolutely right. If you came forth with a coalition of churches and say, we need 10 geothermal wells dug, or solar if that's possible, or insulation, or new windows, or new HVAC system. They just installed HVAC in my house. Wes was there yesterday, saw it yesterday. So that's something we're open to, Linda. If the churches here want to band together, it's about scale, people.
Yep.
If you only
Always
have one or
scale,
two
scale,
houses,
scale.
there's no cost benefit. If you got 10 or 20, Ken's absolutely right. You're going to get a bargain basement price across the board because it's bang, bang, bang. You're just repeating it over and over again.
Kind of with what's being said, everybody has an idea or a suggestion or a question, even as far as a congregation or a group. And it's something I've had to work on. Yes, I can say this is what our church wants. And all of you guys have said, well, what is it that your church wants? When I say this is what our church can do, I look at what I am willing to say to you that I commit to do. Because, yes, I can say as a member of council, or I know what I can commit to do. You know, if I say somebody will be there, I'm saying I'm the somebody that will be there if we set up a meeting. Because, yes, I can say this is what we're interested in getting done. But then I'm willing to commit that I'll be the one that's there if we set up that, whatever the meeting is. Because, yes, I can say this is what was agreed upon the last time I talked to everybody else. But as the lady back there was saying, everybody kind of steps away once that commitment is said. That commitment was said last week at the meeting. All of a sudden, like for the meeting today, there was supposed to be somebody else here with me. And, there were a lot of other people. I know there were a lot of other name tags out there that didn't show up. What happened to all those other people that had committed to, what I'm saying, and there are a lot of valid reasons, but there's something that always comes up. You know, we commit to doing certain things, and that's what I'm saying. When I know personally, if I agree to do something, unless earth and sea, fire, family, whatever, I try to keep that commitment. So, you know, all of us depend on, we're trying to do, I personally try to commit to do what I'm saying I'm doing. And I think a lot of us do that. But I mean, again, that's what's important to me as far as in the church, or, you know, what we're saying to do.
I committed to meet with you. I committed to meet with the young lady back there over on Queen Lane. Now, if I meet with her, I'm going to write up a short report. I'm going to send it to her, and I'm going to send it to that lady in the back in the black and white. Okay? Now, once I do that, I've met my commitment. Now, if she calls you and she said, well, what happened with the report? And you said, well, my church decided not to do it. Then eventually she's going to tell me, don't waste my time going there. You know, because I can sit home and hug my wife for the hour and a half that I would spend at your church.
Yeah, let me say, I like spending a day driving around. I go up to Bartow, PA, to Long Acres Dairy for a nice shake and milk in a glass bottle. And I drive by a lot of Lutheran churches here and there. And, you know, I've taken Wes along.
Yeah, for good milkshakes.
For a day. And, you know, it doesn't bug me to come out and meet you. It really doesn't. But Ken's right. The deeper level of involvement you want us to take on, of course, we expect some commitment back. Because, you know, eventually we do like to close a deal now and then. We don't have to. I'm not a realtor. Wes is, but he's dealing mainly with residential properties. If he's interested in your church at all, you decide to close it and try to get him to turn it into some nice family that's got a yoga studio down below and apartment up above. But he's not a commercial guy, you know. So we're offering you our services. We're glad to come out. I am. Ken likes to go out in the country with his wife Sheila. They like to romp around, and you know, I like to go get the cider in season and the homemade pies. Who said they had a church thing coming up recently? Queen Lane. Queen Lane. It's community day. Is there going to be food? What are we talking? Chicken barbecue? Homemade pie? Oh, okay. No, this gets my attention. No. Yeah. So seriously, we're happy to come out around the synod. We've done that with everybody. But I'll give you more, something that came up earlier. Phoenixville United Methodist Church, across from the high school, they're trying every trick in the book to keep alive their church. It's not a historic church, it's a new one. I mean, they're renting out daycare, they've got cell towers, you know, pretty much everything. But they're sitting on 15 acres of land. That, again, they just watch the weeds grow. So we went up there initially. When I first got to Pennsylvania, I was just thinking affordable housing. And I got them a good offer for a couple of $1 million, but only to build 50 units of low-income senior housing, which is, again, the government cap, not mine. But then a little bit down the road, I realized I had people like Westrom and other people, Marcus couldn't join us apparently, that would go there and build 200 apartments, because that's the right. But they would do it market rate, they would do it quickly. The church would have the option to turn some of the units affordable or put the money into endowment, whatever they wanted to do. So we've seen, and by the way, we can work with churches as well and say, have you thought about part of the church being a medical office or a cell tower or a daycare? Or I'm talking to the First Baptist Church guys who have a room upstairs about turning it into a cooking school. They're in downtown by Rittenhouse Square, and it's just, you know, people come for wine tasting and cooking classes and really cool stuff. And that will probably help build your congregation. The people coming for wine tasting, you're going to evangelize them. So just remind them that Jesus made wine. You know? And Martin Luther liked beer, people. Did he not? Am I wrong? He wrote some of his best stuff.
His wife. So Katie was a brewer.
His wife was a brewer. There you go. See what I'm saying? You could turn churches into micro brew pubs, whatever. No, there are a lot of options. And we're not just housing guys. We're also economic development. Ken and I are working down the street with New Covenant, talking to them about selling an acre they don't need into a medical clinic with pediatricians, because we realized from studying that there's a shortage of pediatricians in this neighborhood. And we're pretty far along the line trying to get that moving. So it's not just, we want to tear down your building. We don't. If there's a way to save it, we'll tell you there's a way to save it. If there's a way we think it's not savable, we're not going to lie to you. We're not going to go into Calvary Methodist Church and charge you $20,000 to do a report that's not based on truth. You know, we'll tell them, your daycare center has asbestos tiles, guys. These are kids, these are asbestos tiles. This is a major liability. Your parapets up on the roof, remember? They're ready to fall on Baltimore Avenue and whack somebody. You don't want that. So Ken went through for 2 full days for free and gave them the professional lights engineering report. In fact, they couldn't even get their heating system to work. The Mennonites were sharing the space. They vacated because they had no heat. The Methodists couldn't get their act together because there were only like 20 of them. So they lost their other partner groups that were sharing space in the chapel and so on because they couldn't get their HVAC system to work.
Okay. One of the things that is happening in our community and its selective areas is urgent care centers. It's kind of like moving away from the big hospital buildings that you see, where there's a central hospital building, but there are urgent care units all around. And basically, it depends on your church, where your church is located, how easily accessible it is to ambulance or so forth, doors at city level, at ground level, and you can have an urgent care center, you know, in your church building, but you gotta understand that the church building has to be open in that area 24/7. So, you know, so there are a number of things that can be done, and we will tell you everything that we know if we know that you're serious. You know, we don't want to waste your time, and we don't want you to waste our time.
Wes, any more questions? Yes.
So, just an FYI, there is a brewery in Miami, Florida, that has a chapel in the back. It's a Lutheran
Really?
developmental site. Yeah, they've got, you know, Brood of Vipers IPA and stuff like that. It's pretty fantastic. Yeah. So when we start talking about this kind of thing, we, you know, a lot of the conversation can get kind of negative pretty quickly. We're talking numbers, and then you know, observations about other people's commitment and things like that. And not to, it can get, it's easy to get discouraged. Do you guys have any guidance on how to turn this? I mean, how to turn the direction of the conversation? I mean, these are all leaders in churches, whether you're pastors in here or not. You're leaders. So when we're talking to our congregations about this, do you have any guidance on how to shift this into talking about the opportunity that we actually have to shift the mission of the church, to move from the thing that we expect into some sort of brighter, newer thing?
Well, let Ken go first.
Personally, me, if a church is looking to upgrade in any manner, I would want to come out to the building, see the community around the building, hear from them what they'd like to do, and then see if it can be done in that envelope, give them some suggestions of what can be done in that envelope. And if they can then go back and meet and come back and say, well, we don't want to do A, B, and C that you told us, but we are open to doing D and E, then I will say, okay, if you do D and E, here are some ways that you can possibly get it financed.
Let me offer a more spiritual answer to your question. And it's, I'll explain. I'm going to go a little bit evangelical. In the book, the people at Abington Presbyterian Church spent a lot of time in prayer and Bible study, listening to the Lord. The Quakers would say looking for the light, discernment, trashing sessions, scrupling sessions. So I would encourage you as leaders to sit down with your congregation, invite us in if you want. We've done that at the Norristown Baptist Church. We came and sat down with their pastor and their deacons and shared our thoughts, which they listened to, and they went out and discovered what kind of needs there were in the community. So I think at the end of the day, we're spiritual people, and we have to lead by listening internally and externally. We have to go out in prayer and talk to people and listen humbly, because maybe some radical changes are necessary, like they did at Abington Presbyterian. Maybe not. Maybe something more moderate. I can't say, because every context is different. But to answer your question, hopefully, it's about prayer, it's about Bible study, it's about theological reflection. I mean, I whipped through this Constantinian thing because that's particularly my bias. You know, I like the early church in Acts 2 and 4 a lot. I've been part of house churches. I'm part of something called Jubilee Fellowship, which was Lutherans and Mennonites and United Church of Christ people in Southwest Philly. Al Crass. Anybody remember Al Crass from Bucks County? Montgomery County? Al was a heavy-duty guy in the affordable housing world of an interfaith task force. So there's things that have been done, can be done, but I think it's got to be rooted in a serious, deep, prayerful conversation within these gatherings.
Last thing I would say also, when you start meeting people who are bringing a need, and you're like, wait, I can help with that. I actually may have the resources. We may be in position. That's energizing, right? That's ministry. That's why I'm in this, right? It's like, wow, you're struggling with your credit or your sports gambling addiction or whatever. We have some resources, and that brings an energy, because like in our minds, in my mind, I think I know what people want, but when you start that interaction, talking to the community, talking to the families, what are the families really struggling with, that brings an energy to realize, wait, we may be able to solve a problem mutually. I find that really energizing.
Let me add to that, Wes, again from the book. And again, this is one of my favorite Jesus sermons, the whole thing about wineskins, new wineskins, old wineskins. And that's very much in the book, that sometimes, and I know it's hard for me to think of First Mennonite Church in Winnipeg being a pile of rubble in a few years the way they're going. Because that was my childhood church. I sang in the Christmas pageant every year. With silver bells or whatever in German. Kling, Gleckchen, kling-a-ling-a-ling, kling, Gleck. You know, that was me, right? I was on the stage with the bishop and everyone else. You know, so I'm going to miss First Mennonite, and I hope they think through what comes next. If there's going to be a new wineskin that comes out of the old wineskins, so be it. But it's got to be prayerfully thought through with depth.
I have two more administrative questions. We mentioned taking notes and trying to get the information, and you mentioned it'll be available in the recording. Is this something we're automatically going to get, or do we have to request a copy of the recording? Or will it automatically be sent to those that registered? That's one part. The second part is for the gentlemen, all of our speakers. If we, as a conference, have a meeting and we want to invite you guys to come in and do the same kind of thing, we're able to do that? Just to give info.
Are you going to feed us?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Yes, we will. That's how we get people to come to meetings. You have food.
Yeah, we wouldn't mind some Lutheran beer either. That would be a great meeting. Yeah.
So we are at 2:45, and I don't want to cut conversation short, but I also want to honor your time, and we said that we would go from 10 to 3. So are there... So if anybody wants to stay behind, they will stay behind to speak with you. I just wanted to say a couple things about vitality, because a lot of the questions that you are asking, and 1, 2, just a couple of people in this room I have met at their conference meetings. So if your conference has not asked me to come to their conference meeting yet, then that should be something that you need to talk to your dean about, so that we can make that happen. But I want to say to you that in our conversations about vitality, there is no longer a cookie cutter approach to vitality. I will not ever be handing a congregation a list of things to do to figure out your vitality. Every congregation has its own unique DNA. So I approach, yes, I do have what I call my bag of tricks. But when I approach a congregation, I'm talking to them. I want to know about them. I want to know about their community. And then those are the things that we work on together for you to figure out what is going on in your community where you are missing an opportunity. And then how do we energize not just the congregation, but the community to rally around that thing, whatever that thing is. But first and foremost, as Robert said, and anybody who's heard me talk about vitality, you will hear me say this: if you are not doing this work in prayer and discernment, then you need to stop. We say we are church together. We say we are about seeing what the new thing is. As Bishop keeps reminding us, we need to ponder anew. And this is work that has to be done in prayer and discernment, because otherwise you're just doing what you need to do, what you feel is the right thing to do, and you're not being led by the Holy Spirit and by God. So I do not have magic answers. I do not have a standard list that I hand out. Those days are over and gone. But myself, along with all the other people on staff and Senate, we will work with you for your best outcome. So if you don't have my email address, here's your opportunity to write it down. My name is Pastor Linda Manson. My email address is my first initial L, my last name Manson, MANSON, @SEPA.org. Send me an email. I am probably going to say, click that link on that link in my signature that says my calendar. Make an appointment with me, whatever you feel you need. I think I have options set up from a half an hour conversation to a 2-hour Zoom. Choose what you think you need and make an appointment. Don't keep emailing me saying, when are you available? My calendar will tell you the times that I'm available. And let's have a conversation and keep moving forward. There are lots of wonderful things going on in SEPA, but there's a whole lot more that could be going on in SEPA. So let's get started. Yes, so thank you, Chair. The recording will be posted on our website, correct? Oh, and a big thank you to Pastor Paula Lebo, who's our Senate communications person, who's in the booth. She's recording, she's monitoring mics and all that stuff. So a big thank you to her for being here today also. But just please contact me. Talk with your deans also about the things, some of these things that you talked about today. But just know that we're here. We're here as a resource for you, and we're going to do the best that we can always.
Yeah, I can do that. Before we leave the space, I will say this. If you get to the point where you are ready to sell your building, the office of the bishop has to be involved with that decision. It involves relocation, and that's a piece that we have to constitutionally do through the office of the bishop. So just give us a heads up. We would love to walk alongside of you as you make these decisions. I will tell the story of when I was dean of Lower Montgomery, and I was talking with the folks at Living Word Roslyn, who were very excited that the Baptist church had bought their building. And I said, well, what's the leaseback agreement? And they were like $14.50 a month. And I was like, well, that's $14.50, right? And they were like, no, it's $1,450. I said, well, you own the building. Why didn't you negotiate better terms? We didn't know we could do that. So, people know how to do this. We don't do this work alone. I feel that this is a huge opportunity for us to right-size a lot of our spaces. As we did the work with the Urban Ministry Task Force, I know for the 21 congregations that made up that study area, there are millions of dollars worth of deferred maintenance. We in the city of Philadelphia have a lot of buildings that were built during the Gilded Age when people had money. We have inherited those churches. Not any one of us, I mean, maybe your grandparents, but not any one of us really built any of the spaces we're in. But we're stewards of it, and we're called to do the best that we can. So, there are resources out there beyond what we've talked about here today. Know that your church-wide office, the ELCA, those monies that we send in mission support, are creating a team in Chicago at the church-wide office that is looking at building resources. So, if you've not been on the ELCA's website in a while, to know that they have a resource tab at the top. If you click on that, one of the drop-down categories is their building resources. One of the tools we're working on right now is a building ramp assessment. So this is an assessment tool that you can do in your congregation that will tell you what's coming in, what cost and major projects are going on in your building, and how much lifespan you have in this building. That if you need something to help people get real about how hard it is to stay in this building, those resources are there. So yeah, I like to point those out too. Partners for Sacred Places is another, there are resources around that we can help with this, but this could be a huge opportunity for us. And so this, to me, is also the prayerful answer to the work that we started with the Urban Task Force of what are we going to do with these buildings? Well, there are people out there who know how to do this. And we can partner with them, or we can stay in our silos. And I will come and say, this congregation is closed in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. I don't like doing that. I don't want to do that. So.
Bishop, can I say one thing on what you brought up? If you are thinking about selling a building, sell it before the roof deteriorates.
Yes.
Or otherwise, you will end up carrying insurance on a building that you can't sell.
Yep. Insurance is a whole other topic. All right. That's another Saturday. All right, question for all of you. Do you have more ideas than when you started? Do you feel like we were together as a synod today? Yes. Do you feel energized? Yes. Do you have a sense of hope? Yes. Then I have done my job today. Let us close with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for the time that we were able to gather this afternoon and this day. We thank you for the many thoughts and ideas and wonderful spirit movings that happened here today. May it continue to send us forth to proclaim your good news, that hope is possible, that newness is possible, that reinventing our spaces is possible, that you might be equipping a new generation of church in a new, an abundant, and amazing way. And so I pray for that synergy as we leave this space. May the conversations be fruitful in congregations. May we continue to see our calling to be church for this day, for the sake of the world, so that others might be drawn to know your love in new and abundant ways. In Christ's holy name we pray. Amen.